Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade 1989 Movie Review. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is a 1989 American action-adventure film directed by Steven Spielberg from a screenplay by Jeffrey Boehm, based on a story by George Lucas and Menno Mage. It is the third installment in the Indiana Jones film series and the narrative sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, 1981. Harrison Ford reprises his role as the titular character, while Sean Connery co-stars as his father. Other cast members featured include Alison Doody, Denholm Elliott, Julian Glover, River Phoenix, and John Rhys Davis. In the film, set in 1938, Indiana Jones searches for his father, a Holy Grail scholar, who has been kidnapped and held hostage by the Nazis while on a journey to find the Holy Grail. After the criticism that Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, 1984, received, Spielberg chose to make a more light-hearted film for the next installment, as well as bringing back several elements from Raiders of the Lost Ark. During the 5 years between Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade, he and executive producer Lucas reviewed several scripts before accepting Jeffrey Boehm's. Filming locations included Spain, Italy, West Germany, Jordan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was released in the United States on May 24, 1989, by Paramount Pictures. The film received positive reviews and was a financial success, earning $474.2 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing film of 1989. It also won the Academy Award for Best Sound Effects Editing and was nominated for Best Original Score and Best Sound at the 62nd Academy Awards. Although Spielberg and Lucas originally intended for The Last Crusade to be the end of the series, a sequel, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, followed in May 2008, while a fifth and final film, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, was released in June 2023. In 1912, Boy Scout Indiana Jones lives with his father Henry Jones Sr. in Moab, Utah. One day, while exploring caves on an excursion with his scout troop, Indy takes a crucifix owned by Francisco Vázquez de Coronado from a group of grave robbers led by a man named Garth, and after a brief chase on horseback and aboard a circus train, Indy flees to his home, where Garth and his men find him and confiscate the crucifix with the help of the local sheriff. Garth, however, admits his respect for the scrappy young man, and gives him his fedora before leaving. In 1938, Indy successfully takes back the crucifix from the employer of the grave robbers off the Portuguese coast. After returning to his university classroom in the United States, Indy learns his father has disappeared while searching for the Holy Grail and Henry's home was ransacked. Walter Donovan, his father's financial backer, tasks Indy with finding both Henry and the Grail. Indy receives a package containing Henry's diary, which includes his research on the Grail, and travels to Venice alongside Marcus Brody to meet Henry's associate Dr. Elsa Schneider. Beneath the library where Henry was last seen, Indy and Elsa discover a catacomb containing an inscribed shield which reveals that the path to the Grail begins in Alexandretta. The two are subsequently attacked by a mysterious group who reveal themselves to be the secret Brotherhood of the Cruciform Sword, dedicated to protecting the Grail. After saving the group's leader Kazim, Indy learns that Henry is being held at Brunwald Castle in Austria. Indy entrusts Marcus with a map from the diary detailing a route to the Grail and sends him to Alexandretta to rendezvous with their old friend Salah. Discovering their rooms have been ransacked, Indy reveals the diary's existence to Elsa before they sleep together. In Austria, Indy and Elsa infiltrate the castle, discovering it to be under Nazi control commanded by Standartenführer Ernst Vogel. Indy finds Henry and tries to escape, but surrenders after Vogel holds Elsa at gunpoint. She reveals herself and Donovan to be Nazi collaborators and takes the diary. After arriving in Alexandretta, Marcus is captured by the Nazis as well. Elsa returns to Germany, while Indy and Henry escape the castle before traveling to Berlin, where Indy retrieves the diary during a book-burning rally hosted by Adolf Hitler. After recovering it from Elsa, Indy and Henry flee on a Zeppelin. Soon the Zeppelin reroutes back to Germany, forcing Indy and his father to commandeer a spare plane before evading two Luftwaffe planes pursuing them. Once Indy and Henry arrive in Hawaii, Salah informs them that the Nazis have also traveled there using the map. While they are following the trail, the Nazis are ambushed by Qasim and the Brotherhood, but the Nazis manage to kill them all. Henry takes advantage of the distraction to try to rescue Marcus but is captured. Indy attacks the Nazi convoy in response and is eventually able to destroy it with help from Henry and Marcus while sending Vogel and his tank over the cliff. Indy, Henry, Marcus, and Salah proceed to a temple containing the Grail, where they observe the Nazis attempting to overcome the temple's traps before being captured. Donovan forces Indy to find safe passage for them by mortally wounding Henry. A drink from the Grail can heal him. With the help of the diary, Indy overcomes the traps and finds a room with many cups and an ancient knight, who explains that only one cup is the true Grail. Donovan and Elsa enter the room, and Elsa deliberately gives him the wrong cup, killing Donovan after he drinks from it. Indy identifies the true Grail and saves Henry's life with a warning from the knight that the Grail can never cross the Great Seal. Elsa ignores the warning, setting off a cataclysm in the temple. She falls to her death trying to take the Grail, and Indy nearly suffers the same fate before Henry convinces him to let it go. The Grail falls into an abyss as Indy and his companions escape and ride off into the sunset. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg had intended to make a trilogy of Indiana Jones films since Lucas had first pitched Raiders of the Lost Ark to Spielberg in 1977, though they signed for 5 films with Paramount Pictures by 1979. After the mixed critical and public reaction to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Spielberg decided to complete the trilogy to fulfill his promise to Lucas, with the intent to imbue the film with the spirit and tone of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Temple of Doom writers Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz chose not to return due to both having other commitments and feeling satisfied with their work in the second film. Throughout the film's development and pre-production, Spielberg admitted he was consciously regressing in making the film. Due to his commitment to the film, the director had to drop out of directing Big and Rain Man. Lucas initially suggested making the film a haunted mansion movie, for which Romancing the Stone writer Diane Thomas wrote a script. Spielberg rejected the idea because of the similarity to Poltergeist, which he had co-written and produced. Lucas first introduced the Holy Grail in an idea for the film's prologue, which was to be set in Scotland. He intended the Grail to have a pagan basis, with the rest of the film revolving around a separate Christian artifact in Africa. Spielberg did not care for the Grail idea, which he found too esoteric, even after Lucas suggested giving it healing powers and the ability to grant immortality, much like the fictional magical power given to the Ark in the first film of the trilogy. In September 1984, Lucas completed an 8-page treatment titled Indiana Jones and the Monkey King, which he soon followed with an 11-page outline. The story saw Indiana battling a ghost in Scotland before finding the Fountain of Youth in Africa. Chris Columbus, who had written the Spielberg-produced Gremlins, The Goonies, and Young Sherlock Holmes, was hired to write the script. His first draft, dated May 3, 1985, changed the main plot device to a garden of immortal peaches. It begins in 1937, with Indiana battling the murderous ghost of Baron Seamus Seagrove III in Scotland. Indiana travels to Mozambique to aid Dr. Claire Clark, a Katharine Hepburn type according to Lucas, who has found a 200-year-old pygmy. The pygmy is kidnapped by the Nazis during a boat chase, and Indiana, Claire, and Scraggy Briar, an old friend of Indiana, travel up the Zambezi River to rescue him. Indiana is killed in the climactic battle but is resurrected by the Monkey King. Other characters include a cannibalistic African tribe, Nazi Sergeant Gutterbug, who has a mechanical arm, Betsy, a stowaway student who is suicidally in love with Indiana, and a pirate leader named Kazur, described as a Toshiro Mifune type, who dies eating a peach because he is not pure of heart. Columbus's second draft, dated August 6, 1985, removed Betsy and featured an expatriate bar owner for whom the Nazis work and the Monkey King as villains. The Monkey King forces Indiana and Dash to play chess with real people and disintegrates each person who is captured. Indiana subsequently battles the undead, destroys the Monkey King's rod, and marries Claire. Location scouting commenced in Africa, but Spielberg and Lucas abandoned Monkey King because of its negative depiction of African natives and because the script was too unrealistic. Spielberg acknowledged that it made him feel very old, too old to direct it. Columbus's script was leaked onto the internet in 1997, and many believed it was an early draft for the fourth film because it was mistakenly dated to 1995. Dissatisfied, Spielberg suggested introducing Indiana's father, Henry Jones, Sr. Lucas was dubious, believing the Grail should be the story's focus, but Spielberg convinced him that the father-son relationship would serve as a great metaphor in Indiana's search for the artifact. Spielberg hired Menno Mage, who had worked on Spielberg's The Color Purple and Empire of the Sun, to begin a new script on January 1, 1986. Mage completed his script 10 months later. It depicted Indiana searching for his father in Montskoor, where he meets a nun named Chantal. Indiana travels to Venice, takes the Orient Express to Istanbul, and continues by train to Petra, where he meets Salah and reunites with his father. Together they find the Grail. At the climax, a Nazi villain touches the Grail and explodes. When Henry touches it, he ascends a stairway to heaven. Chantal chooses to stay on Earth because of her love for Indiana. In a revised draft dated 2 months later, Indiana finds his father in Cracta Chevaliers. The Nazi leader is a woman named Greta von Grimm, and Indiana battles a demon at the Grail site, which he defeats with a dagger inscribed with "God is King." The prologue in both drafts has Indiana in Mexico battling for possession of Montezuma's death mask with a man who owns gorillas as pets. Spielberg suggested Inner Space writer Jeffrey Boehm perform the next rewrite. Boehm spent 2 weeks reworking the story with Lucas, which yielded a treatment that is largely similar to the final film. Boehm told Lucas that Indiana should find his father in the middle of the story. Given the fact that it's the third film in the series, you couldn't just end with them obtaining the object. That's how the first 2 films ended, he said, so I thought, let them lose the Grail, and let the father-son relationship be the main point. It's an archaeological search for Indy's own identity, and coming to accept his father is more what it's about than the quest for the Grail. Boehm said he felt there was not enough character development in the previous films. In Boehm's first draft, dated September 1987, the film is set in 1939. The prologue has adult Indiana retrieving an Aztec relic for a museum curator in Mexico and features the circus train. Henry and Elsa, who is described as having dark hair, were searching for the Grail on behalf of the Chandler Foundation, before Henry went missing. The character of Kazim is here named Kemal, and is an agent of the Republic of Hawaii, which seeks the Grail for its own. Kemal shoots Henry and dies drinking from the wrong chalice. The Grail Knight battles Indiana on horseback, while Vogel is crushed by a boulder while attempting to steal the Grail. Boehm's February 23, 1988, rewrite used many of Connery's comic suggestions. It included the prologue that was eventually filmed, because of the mixed response to Empire of the Sun, which was about a young boy. Lucas had to convince Spielberg to show Indiana as a boy. Spielberg, who was later awarded the Distinguished Eagle Scout Award, had the idea of making Indiana a Boy Scout. The 1912 prologue as seen in the film refers to events in the lives of Indiana's creators. When Indiana cracks the bullwhip to defend himself against a lion, he accidentally lashes and scars his chin. Ford gained this scar in a car accident as a young man. For Indiana taking his nickname from his pet Alaskan Malamute is a reference to the character being named after Lucas's dog. The train carriage Indiana enters is named Dr. Fantasy's Magic Caboose, which was the name producer Frank Marshall used when performing magic tricks. Spielberg suggested the idea, Marshall came up with the false-bottomed box through which Indiana escapes, and production designer Elliott Scott suggested the trick be done in a single, uninterrupted shot. Spielberg intended the shot of Henry with his umbrella after he causes the bird strike on the German plane to evoke Ryan's daughter. Indiana's mother, named Margaret in this version, dismisses Indiana when he returns home with the Cross of Coronado, while his father is on a long-distance call. Walter Chandler of the Chandler Foundation features, but is not the main villain. He plunges to his death in the tank. Elsa introduces Indiana and Brody to a large Venetian family that knows Henry. Leni Riefenstahl appears at the Nazi rally in Berlin. Vogel is beheaded by the traps guarding the Grail. Kemal tries to blow up the Grail temple during a comic fight in which gunpowder is repeatedly lit and extinguished. Elsa shoots Henry, then dies drinking from the wrong Grail, and Indiana rescues his father from falling into the chasm while grasping for the Grail. Boehm's revision of March 1 showed Henry causing the seagulls to strike the plane, and has Henry saving Indiana at the end. During an undated Amblin Entertainment revision and a rewrite by Tom Stoppard, under the pen name Barry Watson, dated May 8, 1988, further changes were made. Stoppard polished most of the dialogue and created the Panama Hat character to link the prologue segments featuring the young and adult Indianas. The Venetian family is cut. Kemal is renamed Kazim and now wants to protect the Grail rather than find it. Chandler is renamed Donovan. The scene of Brody being captured is added. Vogel now dies in the tank, while Donovan shoots Henry and then drinks from the false Grail, and Elsa falls into the chasm. The Grail trials are expanded to include the stone stepping and leap of faith. Principal photography began on May 16, 1988, in the Tabernas Desert in Spain's Almeria province. Spielberg originally had planned the chase to be a short sequence shot over 2 days, but he drew up storyboards to make the scene an action-packed centerpiece. Thinking he would not surpass the truck pursuit from Raiders of the Lost Ark, because the truck was much faster than the tank, he felt this sequence should be more story-based and needed to show Indiana and Henry helping each other. He later said he had more fun storyboarding the sequence than filming it. The second unit had begun filming 2 weeks before. After approximately 10 days, the production moved to the Escuela de Arte de Almeria, to film the scene set in the Sultan of Hatay's palace. Cabo de Gataniger Natural Park was used for the road, tunnel, and beach sequence, at Playa de Monsel, in which birds strike the plane. The shoot's Spanish portion wrapped on June 2, 1988, in Guadix, Granada, with filming of Brody's capture at Alexandretta train station. The filmmakers built a mosque near the station for atmosphere, rather than adding it as a visual effect. The exteriors of Brunwald Castle were filmed at Berresheim Castle in West Germany. In the movie, the image of the castle has been flipped and the building was expanded with a matte painting depicting a copy of the right facade to the left of the main tower. Filming for the castle interiors took place in the United Kingdom from June 5 to 10, 1988, at Elstree Studios in Boreham Wood, England. On June 16, Lawrence Hall, London, was used as the interior of Berlin Tempelhof Airport. Filming returned to Elstree the next day to capture the motorcycle escape, continuing at the studio for interior scenes until July 18. 1 day was spent at Northfield Airfield on June 29 to film Indiana leaving for Venice. Ford and Connery acted much of the Zeppelin table conversation without trousers on because of the overheated set. Spielberg, Marshall, and Kennedy interrupted the shoot to make a plea to the Parliament of the United Kingdom to support the economically depressed British studios. July 20 to 22 was spent filming the temple interiors. The temple set, which took 6 weeks to build, was supported on 80 feet, 24 m, of hydraulics and 10 gimbals for use during the earthquake scene. Resetting between takes took 20 minutes while the hydraulics were put to their starting positions and the cracks filled with plaster. The shot of the Grail falling to the temple floor causing the first crack to appear was attempted on the full-size set, but proved too difficult. Instead, crews built a separate floor section that incorporated a pre-scored crack sealed with plaster. It took several takes to throw the Grail from 6 feet, 1.8 m, onto the right part of the crack. July 25 to 26 was spent on night shoots at Stowe School, Stowe, Buckinghamshire, for the Nazi rally. Filming resumed 2 days later at Elstree, where Spielberg swiftly filmed the library, Portuguese freighter, and catacomb sequences. The steamship fight in the prologue's 1938 portion was filmed in 3 days on a 60 by 40 feet, 18 by 12 meter, deck built on gimbals at Elstree. A dozen dump tanks, each holding 300 imperial gallons, 360 US gallons, 3,000 pounds, 1,363 liters, of water, were used in the scene. Henry's house was filmed at Mill Hill, London. Indiana and Cossim's fight in Venice in front of a ship's propeller was filmed in a water tank at Elstree. Spielberg used a long focus lens to make it appear the actors were closer to the propeller than they really were. 2 days later, on August 4, another portion of the boat chase using Hackercraft sport boats, was filmed at Tilbury Docks in Essex. The shot of the boats passing between two ships was achieved by first cabling the ships off so they would be safe. The ships were moved together while the boats passed between, close enough that one of the boats scraped the sides of the ships. An empty speedboat containing dummies was launched from a floating platform between the ships amid fire and smoke that helped obscure the platform. The stunt was performed twice because the boat landed too short of the camera in the first attempt. The following day, filming in England wrapped at the Royal Masonic School in Rickmansworth, which doubled for Indiana's college, as it had in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Shooting in Venice took place on August 8. For scenes such as Indiana and Brody greeting Elsa, shots of the boat chase, and Cossim telling Indiana where his father is, Robert Watts gained control of the Grand Canal from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m., sealing off tourists for as long as possible. Cinematographer Douglas Slocum positioned the camera to ensure no satellite dishes would be visible. San Barnaba di Venezia served as the library's exterior. The next day, filming moved to the ancient city of Petra, Jordan, where Al-Hazna, the treasury, stood in for the temple housing the Grail. The cast and crew became guests of King Hussein and Queen Noor. The treasury had previously appeared in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. The main cast completed their scenes that week, after 63 days of filming. The second unit filmed part of the prologue's 1912 segment from August 29 to September 3. The main unit began 2 days later with the circus train sequence at Alamosa, Colorado, on the Cumbers and Toltec Scenic Railroad. They filmed at Pagosa Springs on September 7, and then at Cortez on September 10. From September 14 to 16, filming of Indiana falling into the train carriages took place in Los Angeles. The production then moved to Utah's Arches National Park to shoot more of the opening. A house in Antonito, Colorado was used for the Jones family home. The production had intended to film at Mesa Verde National Park, but Native American representatives had religious objections to its use. When Spielberg and editor Michael Kahn viewed a rough cut of the film in late 1988, they felt it suffered from a lack of action. The motorcycle chase was shot during post-production at Mount Tamalpais and Fairfax near Skywalker Ranch. The closing shot of Indiana, Henry, Salo, and Brody riding into the sunset was filmed in Amarillo, Texas in early 1989 by the second unit, directed by Frank Marshall. Filming ended on September 16, 1988, after 123 days of filming. Mechanical effects supervisor George Gibbs said the film was the most difficult one of his career. He visited a museum to negotiate renting a small French World War I tank, but decided he wanted to make one. The tank was based on the tank Mark 8, which was 11 meters, 36 feet, long and weighed 28 short tons, 25 t. However, some liberties were taken with the design. Gibbs built the tank over the framework of a 28 short ton, 25 t, excavator and added 7 short ton, 6.4 t, tracks that were driven by 2 automatic hydraulic pumps, each connected to a Range Rover V8 engine. Gibbs built the tank from steel rather than aluminum or fiberglass because it would allow the realistically suspensionless vehicle to endure the rocky surfaces. Unlike its historic counterpart, which had only the 2 side guns, the tank had a turret gun added as well. It took 4 months to build and was transported to Almeria on a short Belfast plane and then a low-loader truck. The tank broke down twice. The distributor's rotor arm broke and a replacement had to be sourced from Madrid. Then 2 of the device's valves used to cool the oil exploded, due to solder melting and mixing with the oil. It was very hot in the tank, despite the installation of 10 fans, and the lack of suspension meant the driver was unable to stop shaking during filming breaks. The tank only moved at 10 to 12 miles per hour, 16 to 19 kilometers per hour, which Vic Armstrong said made it difficult to film Indiana riding a horse against the tank while making it appear faster. A smaller section of the tank's top made from aluminum and which used rubber tracks was used for close-ups. It was built from a searchlight trailer, weighed 8 tons, and was towed by a 4-wheel drive truck. It had safety nets on each end to prevent injury to those falling off. A quarter-scale model by Gibbs was driven over a 15-meter, 50 feet, cliff on location. Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, created further shots of the tank's destruction with models and miniatures. Michael Lantieri, mechanical effects supervisor for the 1912 scenes, noted the difficulty in shooting the train sequence. "You can't just stop a train," he said, "if it misses its mark, it takes blocks and blocks to stop it and back up." Lantieri hid handles for the actors and stuntmen to grab onto when leaping from carriage to carriage. The carriage interiors shot at Universal Studios Hollywood were built on tubes that inflated and deflated to create a rocking motion. For the close-up of the rhinoceros that strikes at, and misses, Indiana, a foam and fiberglass animatronic was made in London. When Spielberg decided he wanted it to move, the prop was sent to John Carl Buchler in Los Angeles, who resculpted it over 3 days to blink, snarl, snort and wiggle its ears. The giraffes were also created in London. Because steam locomotives are very loud, Lantieri's crew would respond to First Assistant Director David Tomblin's radio directions by making the giraffes nod or shake their heads to his questions, which amused the crew. For the villains' cars, Lantieri selected a 1914 Ford Model T, a 1919 Ford Model T truck and a 1916 Saxon Model 14, fitting each with a Ford Pinto V6 engine. Sacks of dust were hung under the cars to create a dustier environment. Spielberg used doves for the seagulls that Henry scares into striking the German plane because the real gulls used in the first take did not fly. In December 1988, Lucasfilm ordered 1,000 disease-free gray rats for the catacomb scenes from the company that supplied the snakes and bugs for the previous films. Within 5 months, 5,000 rats had been bred for the sequence. 1,000 mechanical rats stood in for those that were set on fire. Several thousand snakes of 5 breeds including a boa constrictor were used for the train scene, in addition to rubber ones onto which Phoenix could fall. The snakes would slither from their crates, requiring the crew to dig through sawdust after filming to find and return them. 2 lions were used, which became nervous because of the rocking motion and flickering lights. Costume designer Anthony Powell found it a challenge to create Connery's costume because the script required the character to wear the same clothes throughout. Powell thought about his own grandfather and incorporated tweed suits and fishing hats. Powell felt it necessary for Henry to wear glasses, but did not want to hide Connery's eyes, so chose rimless ones. He could not find any suitable, so he had them specially made. The Nazi costumes were genuine and were found in Eastern Europe by Powell's co-designer Joanna Johnston, to whom he gave research pictures and drawings for reference. The motorcycles used in the chase from the castle were a mixed bag. The Scout model with sidecar in which Indy and Henry escape was an original Dnieper, complete with machine gun pintle on the sidecar, while the pursuing vehicles were more modern machines dressed up with equipment and logos to make them resemble German Army models. Gibbs used 2 Swiss Pilatus P-2 Air Force training planes standing in as pursuing Luftwaffe Arado AR-90 SIXS for the Zeppelin biplane escape sequence. He built a device based on an internal combustion engine to simulate gunfire, which was safer and less expensive than firing blanks. Baking soda was applied to Connery to create Henry's bullet wound. Vinegar was applied to create the foaming effect as the water from the grail washes it away. At least one reproduction Kubelwagen was used during filming despite the film being set 2 years prior to manufacture of said vehicles. Industrial Light and Magic built an 8-foot, 2.4 m, foam model of the Zeppelin to complement shots of Ford and Connery climbing into the Gotha Go 145C biplane. A biplane model with a 2-foot, 0.61 m, wingspan was used for the shot of the biplane detaching. Stop-motion animation was used for the shot of the German fighter's wings breaking off as it crashes through the tunnel. The tunnel was a 210 feet, 64 m, model that occupied 14 of ILM's parking spaces for 2 months. It was built in 8-foot sections, with hinges allowing each section to be opened to film through. Ford and Connery were filmed against blue screen. The sequence required their car to have a dirty windscreen, but to make the integration easier this was removed and later composited into the shot. Dust and shadows were animated onto shots of the plane miniature to make it appear as if it disturbed rocks and dirt before it exploded. Several hundred timbirds were used in the background shots of the seagulls striking the other plane. For the closer shots, ILM dropped feather-coated crosses onto the camera. These only looked convincing because the scene's quick cuts merely required shapes that suggested gulls. Film's Wes Takahashi supervised the film's visual effects sequences. Spielberg devised the 3 trials that guard the Grail. 3 for the first, the blades under which Indiana ducks like a penitent man were a mix of practical and miniature blades created by Gibbs and ILM. For the second trial, in which Indiana spells Jehovah on stable stepping stones, it was intended to have a tarantula crawl up Indiana after he mistakenly steps on J. This was filmed and deemed unsatisfactory, so ILM filmed a stuntman hanging through a hole that appears in the floor, 30 feet, 9.1 m, above a cavern. As this was dark, it did not matter that the matte painting and models were rushed late in production. The third trial, the leap of faith that Indiana makes over an apparently impassable ravine after discovering a bridge hidden by forced perspective, was created with a model bridge and painted backgrounds. This was cheaper than building a full-size set. A puppet of Ford was used to create a shadow on the 9-foot tall, 2.7 m, by 13 foot wide, 4.0 m, model because Ford had filmed the scene against blue screen, which did not incorporate the shaft of light from the entrance. Spielberg wanted Donovan's death shown in one shot, so it would not look like an actor having makeup applied between takes. Inflatable pads were applied to Julian Glover's forehead and cheeks by Nick Dudman that made his eyes seem to recede during the character's initial decomposition, as well as a mechanical wig that grew his hair. The shot of Donovan's death was the first all-digital composite scene in a movie, and was created over 3 months by morphing together 3 puppets of Donovan created by Stéphane Dupuis in separate stages of decay, a technique ILM mastered on Willow, 1988. A 4th puppet was used for the decaying clothes, because the puppet's torso mechanics had been exposed. Complications arose because Alison Dody's double had not been filmed for the scene's latter 2 elements, so the background and hair from the first shot had to be used throughout, with the other faces mapped over it. Donovan's skeleton was hung on wires like a marionette. It required several takes to film it crashing against the wall because not all the pieces released upon impact. Ben Burtt designed the sound effects. He recorded chickens for the sounds of the rats, and digitally manipulated the noise made by a styrofoam cup for the castle fire. He rode in a biplane to record the sounds for the dogfight sequence, and visited the demolition of a wind turbine for the plane crashes. Burtt wanted an echoing gunshot for Donovan wounding Henry, so he fired a .357 Magnum in Skywalker Ranch's underground car park, just as Lucas drove in. A rubber balloon was used for the earthquake tremors at the temple. The film was released in select theaters in the 70mm full-field sound format, which allowed sounds to not only move from side to side, but also from the theater's front to its rear. Matte paintings of the Austrian castle and the Berlin airport were based on real buildings. The Austrian castle Schloss Brunwald is Beresium Castle near Mayen in Rhineland-Palatinate, West Germany, that was made to look larger. Rain was created by filming granulated borax soap against black at high speed. It was only lightly double exposed into the shot so it would not resemble snow. The lightning was animated. The administration building at San Francisco's Treasure Island was used as the exterior of Berlin Tempelhof Airport. The structure already had period-appropriate Art Deco architecture, as it had been constructed in 1938 for planned use as an airport terminal. ILM added a control tower, Nazi banners, vintage automobiles, and a sign stating Berlin Flughafen. The establishing shot of the Haitian city at dusk was created by filming silhouetted cutouts that were backlit and obscured by smoke. Matte paintings were used for the sky and to give the appearance of fill light in the shadows and rim light on the edges of the buildings. The film's teaser trailer debuted in November 1988 with Scrooged and the Naked Gun. Rob McGregor wrote the tie-in novelization that was released in June 1989. It sold enough copies to be included on the New York Times bestseller list. McGregor went on to write the first 6 Indiana Jones prequel novels during the 1990s. Following the film's release, Ford donated Indiana's fedora and jacket to the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. No toys were made to promote the film. Indiana Jones never happened on the toy level, said Larry Carlett, senior editor of the journal Children's Business. Rather, Lucasfilm promoted Indiana as a lifestyle symbol, selling tie-in fedoras, shirts, jackets, and watches. 38 video games based on the film were released by LucasArts in 1989, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the graphic adventure, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the action game. A third game was produced by Taito and released in 1991 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Ryder Windham wrote another novelization, released in April 2008 by Scholastic, to coincide with the release of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Hasbro released toys based on The Last Crusade in July 2008. The film was released in the United States and Canada on Wednesday, May 24, 1989, in 2,327 theaters, earning a record $37,031,573 over the 4-day Memorial Day weekend. The gross was boosted by high ticket prices in some venues, $7 a ticket. Its 3-day opening weekend figure of $29,355,021 was surpassed later that year by Ghostbusters 2 and Batman, which grossed more in its opening 3 days than The Last Crusade in 4. The film would hold the record for having the highest Memorial Day weekend gross until 1994 when the Flintstones took it. Additionally, it had the largest opening weekend for a Harrison Ford film for 8 years until Air Force One surpassed it in 1997. Its Saturday gross of $11,181,429 was the first time a film had made over $10 million in one day. It broke the record for the best 7-day performance with a gross of $50.2 million, beating the $45.7 million grossed by Temple of Doom in 1984 on 1,687 screens. It added another record with $77 million after 12 days, and earned $100 million in a record 19 days. In France, the film broke a record by selling 1 million admissions within 2.5 weeks. In the United Kingdom, it opened in 3 London theatres before opening 2 days later on 361 screens nationally, setting an opening weekend record of £1,811,542, $2,862,200, breaking the one set the year before by Crocodile Dundee 2. It spent 6 weeks at number 1 in the United Kingdom. The film eventually grossed $197.1 million in the United States and Canada and $277 million internationally, for a worldwide total of $474.20 million. At the time of its release, the film was the 11th highest grossing film of all time. Despite competition from Batman, The Last Crusade became the highest grossing film worldwide in 1989. In North America, Batman took top position. Behind Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Raiders, The Last Crusade is the 3rd highest grossing Indiana Jones film in the United States and Canada, though it is also behind Temple of Doom when adjusting for inflation. Box Office Mojo estimates that the film sold over 49 million tickets in North America. The film was re-released in 1992, earning $139,000. The film was first released on VHS on February 1, 1990. In 2003 it was made available along with its two predecessors as part of a trilogy DVD box set. It contained extra materials and a special documentary covering the production of the films. Sales figures for the box set were extremely successful and 600,000 copies were sold in the US on the first day of release. In 2012, the film was released on Blu-ray along with the three other films in the Indiana Jones film series at the time. In 2021, a remastered 4K HDR version of the film was released on Ultra HD Blu-ray, produced using scans of the original negatives. It was released as part of a box set for the then 4 films in the Indiana Jones film series. Jay Boyer of the Orlando Sentinel said that while the film lacks the novelty of Raiders, and the breathless pacing of Temple of Doom, it was an entertaining capper to the trilogy. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone remarked the film was the wildest and wittiest indie of them all. Richard Corliss of Time and David Anson of Newsweek praised it, as did Vincent Canby of the New York Times. Though it seems to have the manner of some magically reconstituted B-movie of an earlier era, The Last Crusade is an endearing original, Canby wrote, calling the revelation that Jones had a father who was not proud of him to be a comic surprise. Canby believed that while the film did not match the previous two in its pacing, it still had hilariously off-the-wall sequences such as the circus train chase. He also said that Spielberg was maturing by focusing on the father-son relationship, a call echoed by McBride in Variety. Roger Ebert praised the sequence depicting Jones as a Boy Scout with the Cross of Coronado, comparing it to the style of illustration that appeared in the boys' adventure magazines of the 1940s. He said that Spielberg must have been paging through his old issues of Boys' Life magazine, the feeling that you can stumble over astounding adventures just by going on a hike with your scout troop. Spielberg lights the scene in the strong, basic colors of old pulp magazines. The Hollywood Reporter felt Connery and Ford deserved Academy Award nominations. It was panned by Andrew Saris in the New York Observer, David Denby in New York Magazine, Stanley Kaufman in the New Republic and Georgia Brown in the Village Voice. Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader called the film soulless. The Washington Post reviewed the film twice. Hal Hinson's review on the day of the film's release was negative, describing it as nearly all chases and dull exposition. Although he praised Ford and Connery, he felt the film's exploration of Jones's character took away his mystery and that Spielberg should not have tried to mature his storytelling. 2 days later, Desson Thompson published a positive review praising the film's adventure and action, as well as the father-son relationship's thematic depth. In 2025, The Hollywood Reporter listed Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade as having the best stunts of 1989. The film won the Academy Award for Best Sound Effects Editing. It also received nominations for Best Original Score and Best Sound. Ben Bird, Gary Summers, Sean Murphy and Tony Daw. Connery received a Golden Globe Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Connery and the visual and sound effects teams were also nominated at the 43rd British Academy Film Awards. The film won the 1990 Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation, and was nominated for Best Motion Picture Drama at the Young Artist Awards. John Williams's score won a Broadcast Music Incorporated Award, and was nominated for a Grammy Award. The prologue depicting Jones in his youth inspired Lucas to create the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles television series, which featured Sean Patrick Flannery as the young adult Indiana and Corey Carrier as the 8 to 10-year-old Indiana. According to Dark Horse Comics author Lee Mars, Lucasfilm considered for a while to make a continuation to the film series starring Phoenix as a younger Jones, but these plans were dropped after his untimely death. The 13-year-old incarnation played by Phoenix in the film was the focus of a Young Indiana Jones series of young adult novels that began in 1990. By the 9th novel, the series had become a tie-in to the television show. German author Wolfgang Holbein revisited the prologue in one of his novels, in which Jones encounters the lead grave robber whom Holbein christens Jake in 1943. The film's ending begins the 1995 comic series Indiana Jones and the Spear of Destiny, which moves forward to depict Jones and his father searching for the Holy Lands in Ireland in 1945. Spielberg intended to have Connery cameo as Henry in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, 2008, but Connery turned it down as he had retired. Petra's use for the movie's climactic scenes greatly contributed to its popularity as an international tourist destination. Before the film's release, only a few thousand visitors per year made the trip. Since then it has grown to almost 1 million annually. Shops and hotels near the site play up the connection, and it is mentioned prominently in itineraries of locations used in the film series. Jordan's Tourism Board mentions the connection on its website. In 2012, the satirical news site the Pan-Arabia Inquirer ran a mock story claiming that the board had officially renamed Petra, that place from Indiana Jones, to reflect how the world more commonly refers to it. Indiana Jones was practically a pup in 1936 when he rattled off that line in Raiders of the Lost Ark. As Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull opens 21 years afterwards, Indy time, it's pretty clear the odometer of our fedora-wearing hero has long since flipped. Oh, sure, Indiana still has some significant vim in his vavoom. His fist packs the same wallop as always. But decades of constant adventure and peril wear down a guy. His hair has gone from brown to gray. His face is creased. His students no longer write "love you" on their eyelids. And Austrian double agents have given way to Cold War commies. You might think that, instead of spending his sabbaticals cracking whips and running from boulders, Dr. Jones might like time reading the afternoon paper and sipping Earl Grey. Fat chance. Not with evil communist interlopers kidnapping him and demanding he reveal what he was doing in Roswell, NM, circa 1947. They haul him to a massive, and oddly familiar, warehouse in Nevada, piled to the rafters with crates. Then they demand he lead them to an odd metal box containing an odd magnetic corpse which he dug up years earlier. Indy is less than cooperative. "Drop dead, comrade," he says. And, after a few fits and starts, he sparks a massive action sequence involving guns, swords, trucks, whips, chains, rocket backwash and naturally a nuclear explosion. He survives it all with nary a scratch, suggesting that whip-wielding archaeologists, like cows, get tougher with age. How ironic, then, that we haven't even scratched the surface of the storyline, which mashes together crystal skulls, iPod-size ants, aliens, the lost city of El Dorado and one of the most awkward family reunions ever. That's a lot of ground to cover for a college professor, even one with tenure. "You're a teacher?" asks incredulous greaser Mutt Williams, who by plot contrivance becomes Indiana's sidekick. "I'm 39. I was 12 when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, so seeing Indiana Jones still moving around without the aid of a walker is encouraging. Indy has gathered a bit of wisdom through the years, too, and he offers some of it to Mutt. 1. Fixing motorcycles for a living is fine as long as you truly love it, and 2. Stay in school so you don't have to fix motorcycles for a living. Education, naturally, would be an important thing in Indy's ethos, and he tells us, though not in so many words, that knowledge is worth more than gold or silver. But he also advocates a bit of balance in life. To be a good archaeologist, you gotta get out of the library, he tells a student as he speeds away on a motorcycle. Indy is reunited with Raiders paramour Marion Ravenwood, and we learn that the two, despite some rocky times and poor relational decisions, which I'll detail later, never lost eyes for each other. It's refreshing, frankly, to see Indy and Marion exchange mature affection manifested in hugs and smiles and the occasional kiss, and then coming to fruition through a traditional marriage ceremony instead of just rolling around in the hay. Indiana cautions Mutt to treasure his mother, "You only get one, and sometimes not for that long." Also, a character's greed leads to his downfall, while disloyalty is vilified. I may spoil a plot point or two in this section, but a discussion about crystal skulls must be had. The film's title demands it. Stories about Mesoamerican crystal skulls litter the occult, but Indiana Jones 4, while nodding in that direction, takes a different tack. Seems these skulls are actual bones from an alien culture, which thousands of years ago set up an outpost on Earth and taught the citizens of the ancient city of Akator, that's El Dorado to you and me, about irrigation, agriculture, and perhaps even Google. These aliens apparently were psychic beings, and their long-dead skulls still retain some of those abilities. Legend has it that if anyone returns the missing skull to the city, he or she will be imbued with a gift of untold supernatural power. That's weird, perhaps, but it's not exactly spiritual. This, however, is, while Indy never suggests these creatures were gods, they were worshipped as such. The first skull is found near Peru's mysterious Nazca lines that form pictures only decipherable from the air. They're known as the lines that the gods can read because the gods live up there, Indy says. He notes that the Incas used to bind their infants' heads to elongate them as a way to honor their gods. When Mutt points out that God doesn't have a pointed head, Indy says, it depends on who your god is. Indeed, we see several ancient glyphs of long-headed creatures being venerated. The skull is returned, of course topping a crystal skeleton, which then meshes with 12 other alien skeletons to become one living alien. The temple complex is revealed to be a temporary garnish concealing both an interdimensional portal and a gigantic spaceship, buried for eons. On the fringes of this, there are a few acknowledgments of Christianity. Indy and Mutt travel to Peru and talk with nuns about a missing archaeologist. A couple gets married in an old-fashioned church. Elsewhere, a character makes a reference to the Destroyer of Worlds, which Indy notes is a quote from the Hindu Bible. Indiana is naked while in a radiation-banishing shower. We see him from the waist up. He and Marion kiss. Another spoiler warning: Indy admits a couple of times that he's been with, in the biblical sense, lots of women. None of the relationships ever lasted, though, because none had Marion's special spark. And speaking of Marion, we learn that Dr. Jones and Ms. Ravenwood were engaged to be married, but Indy left her shortly before the ceremony. He believed the marriage would never last. Turns out Marion was pregnant with Indy's child though, who in a Superman Returns type twist turns out to be, surprise, a critical character in the story. Action/adventure violence is what Indiana Jones films are all about, and Crystal Skull doesn't let its predecessors go it alone. Extras are mowed down with gusto, and sometimes with gruesome flair. The worst way to die here is via those iPod-esque Amazonian ants, which swarm characters and apparently eat them alive. We see one bad unscreaming as the ants envelop him, crawling into his mouth and ultimately dragging the struggling man to their massive anthill. One evildoer also gets killed by the aliens. A fiery white light explodes out of her eyes before she disintegrates into glittering particles. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of people are shot or fall off cliffs or die in car crashes or get blown to smithereens by atomic bombs. Mannequins and their suburban test community are melted and obliterated in a disturbingly realistic fashion. Indy kills one assailant by blowing the man's own poison dart back into his throat. Several others are burned alive. Indy and Mutt escape the clutches of communist agents by starting a rumble in a soda shop. They careen through city streets on a motorcycle. Indy and Marion almost sink to their deaths in a quicksand-like pit. And the grand remains of an ancient civilization are destroyed in a catastrophic CGI storm. There are many bloody fist fights. And several grisly corpses are encountered. Irina, the communist antagonist, is attacked by monkeys. During a car chase she also engages in a long-running sword fight with Mutt. While straddling two vehicles, Mutt is repeatedly smacked in the crotch by passing branches. Turning the adventure into a cartoon, our heroes tumble over mighty waterfalls, and Indy survives a nuclear blast by hiding in a refrigerator which flies through the air and lands several miles away. The fridge, we can only surmise, was equipped with airbags. Andy drinks a glass of wine with a college administrator. An old partner of his drinks vodka, acting pretty drunk, and smokes a cigarette. Another man smokes a cigar. Mutt swipes a beer off a server's platter at a diner before Indy gracefully returns it. When we first meet Mutt, he looks like the rebellious Marlon Brando from The Wild One, a film released 4 years before Crystal Skull takes place, and, perhaps, a tip-off that Mutt is trying extremely hard to look like a tough guy. Beyond the chase scenes, joyriding teens race alongside a military convoy, often on the wrong side of the highway. The Indiana Jones movies, in many ways archetypes of the modern action flick, are based, according to creator and producer George Lucas, on the cheap, fun serial movies of the 1930s and 40s. As such, they're not supposed to change your life, they're just supposed to be thrilling. The idea was, you take that B genre and move it to the next level, Lucas told Vanity Fair. But a funny thing happened on the way to the theater. At least a couple of these supposed trifles surpassed their ambition and became not just adrenaline-laced actioners, but classic films, filled with passion and subtext and even touches of spiritual significance. Consider the scene in Raiders where Indy sees God's true power, even with his eyes tightly shut. Or consider The Last Crusade, in which Indy learns that our true treasures are those who walk with us, not objects we lust after. Sure, those films were a blast, and by this I'm not saying they avoided problems, but some had enough positive weight to stick with us a while. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is more in keeping with Lucas' original B vision. It's sometimes fun, sometimes thrilling. It's as violent as you'd expect it to be. It has about as much profanity as you'd assume. It is a PG-13, Saturday afternoon serial spiked with CGI. And it does not achieve, nor does it aspire to be, anything greater. This is the quintessential popcorn flick held under heat lamps and topped with tasty but artery-clogging butter, something Indy'd better start cutting back on, considering his age and all. A postscript: it's no accident that Crystal Skull is a PG-13 movie. After all, it was complaints about the violence in the PG-rated Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom that helped spark the launch of a rating that rested in between PG and R. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade deviates from the full-blown Saturday serial adventure formula so jealously adhered to by its predecessors. While keeping our basic escapist moviegoing desires soothed with breathtaking chases and exotic European and West Asian locales, the film's temperament takes a lighter, more emotional detour, especially when compared to, and undoubtedly as a result of, the near-horror tone of its immediate predecessor, Temple of Doom. Filled with constant laughs and a surprising poignancy given the inclusion of Indiana Jones' father, played by Sean Connery, the film's thrills offer a wieldy entertainment harkening back to the plot schematics of Raiders of the Lost Ark. But to whatever degree the raw suspense of the franchise quiets in this third Indiana Jones adventure, the character depth increases tenfold and maintains our involvement on equal planes as the previous entries, yet on alternate dimensions of viewer connectivity. Influential film critic Pauline Kael famously griped about the characterizations in Raiders of the Lost Ark, claiming they were non-existent. She, unduly, called the entire production impersonal. But Harrison Ford's archaeology professor and treasure protector is pointedly flawed, occasionally slapdash, and wholly embodied by the actor as a singular persona that requires no deep-rooted emotional or psychological explication. Indiana Jones is fixed in his simplicity, making his presence effortless for the audience amid otherwise complicated special effects, villains, and plots he seeks to uncover in his adventures. Nevertheless, The Last Crusade could easily serve to appease Kael's criticisms, since, more than the film's MacGuffin, the Holy Grail, this third entry in the Indiana Jones series relies on expounding the emotional history and familial underpinnings of our hero. In true Spielbergian form, the film is complete with a prologue that reaches back into Indy's rebellious teen years, suggesting that our hero will always remain a young at-heart adventurer who never grew up and still has lingering daddy issues, not unlike the director himself. Following the unwarranted misconception that they somehow failed or perhaps frightened their audience with uncomfortable extremes with Temple of Doom, despite considerable box office earnings, more than double its budget, director Steven Spielberg and producer George Lucas sought a homecoming to their original Raiders of the Lost Ark formula, wherein Indy fights Nazis while in search of a religious artifact. This formula was successful because the pre-established religious and historical iconography inhabiting the narrative was familiar, posing no challenge for moviegoers to consume. Lucas suggested the MacGuffin of the Holy Grail, serving up Indiana Jones as a modern-day knight of Arthurian proportions. What could be more heroic? Spielberg initially rejected the idea because he was reminded of Terry Gilliam's comedy classic Monty Python and the Holy Grail, not that Gilliam's knights ever came close to discovering the Grail. Spielberg had long desired an Indiana Jones adventure exploring two elements, a haunted castle and the rambunctious Monkey King from Chinese legend. Chris Columbus, who had written the Spielberg-produced movies Gremlins and The Goonies, was commissioned to write the screenplay. His yarn took place in Africa, used Spielberg's dream MacGuffin of the Monkey King, and, at one point, featured India atop a rhinoceros chasing bad guys. Needless to say, they passed on Columbus' scenario. Meanwhile, as Lucas developed his concepts for the Holy Grail device with another writer, Menno Mage, screenwriter on Spielberg's The Color Purple, the producer soon realized that Spielberg wanted more than a MacGuffin to drive his picture. He wanted emotional growth for a character otherwise entrenched in his singularity, a dangerous concept, one that could change the nature of a character whose simplicity was already a proven triumph. Aiming for mass appeal once more, the filmmakers agreed to humanize Indiana Jones further by mapping out his family life, namely his father, who was initially envisioned as a cantankerous Walter Brennan figure. Screenwriter Jeffrey Boehm, The Dead Zone, was approached next and given only a few criteria: use of the Holy Grail, the inclusion of more humor, and Indy's father as a humanizing device. Spielberg and Lucas accepted Boehm's script. However, many of the film's most enjoyable sequences, the tank and motorcycle chases, were added afterward or altogether improvised, while others were added during uncredited rewrites by Tom Stoppard, Spielberg's Empire of the Sun. The result was another type of Indiana Jones film entirely, reminiscent of Raiders of the Lost Ark, yet on its own, distinctive in pitch, just as each entry had been thus far. Each Indiana Jones film begins with an appetizer, the fundamental climax of Indy's previous untold adventure, leading into the film's central conflict. The Last Crusade begins with a look at our hero at an early age, where his appreciation for ancient artifacts, his attributed hat, whip as a weapon of choice, fear of snakes, and Harrison Ford's real-life chin scar originate in the franchise's continuum. Playing young Indiana, River Phoenix embodies what we would imagine a youthful Harrison Ford to be: agile, attractive, idealistic, slightly haphazard, perhaps overly self-assured, yet always charming. The sequence plays out like a Boy Scout western straight out of a Boy's Life magazine, with Phoenix's comic Indy disrupting the robbery of the Cross of Coronado, chased on horseback by hired raiders, then across the top of circus train cars, and finally back home, where his busy father waves off his son's impatience. Within Phoenix's 10 minutes of screen time, he embodies the character as singularly as Ford, and, had his premature death not occurred in 1993, he would have been the perfect choice to continue the franchise in Ford's footsteps. Much of the humor in The Last Crusade comes, surprisingly, by way of Sean Connery and his uncharacteristic portrayal as a crotchety old intellectual and bumbling bookworm professor. Still, our moviegoer consciousness reads this casting as James Bond being the father of Indiana Jones, which, in many ways, was true, even if Connery is only 12 years older than Ford. After appearing briefly in the prologue, Henry Jones Sr. is not on screen again until mid-film, having been kidnapped by Nazis. By this time, he has already bedded Indy's Austrian guide, Elsa Schneider, Alison Doody, and found the Grail's location, only he has done so without his son's adventurous spirit to spring him out of trouble, hence his capture by Nazi goons. Much to Connery's pleasure and ours, Spielberg had no intention of exploiting a James Bond meets Indiana Jones gimmick with his casting. One adventurer was enough. Indeed, Jones Sr. is quite the opposite. Connery's performance is a total reversal from his suave on-screen super spy personality, offering up an unexpected comic gem in his studious, inept, intellectual type, from which his comparatively brash son has much yet to learn. But these humorous moments are never superfluous, unlike typical genre comic relief. Rather, they add depth to the dynamic between Indy and his father. Watch the motorcycle chase where Indy runs down Nazi pursuers with his father in the sidecar. Our hero sends one Nazi spinning into the air and then smiles to his father for approval, who simply frowns in dissatisfaction and checks the time on his pocket watch. It's a priceless screen moment. Through their interaction, we identify with the boyish, romantic reality of Indy's existence, hunting treasure, fighting villains, and getting the girl. At the same time, his father represents the stuffy adult not tuned into the escapist nature of adventure. This distinction takes us back to the series' origins, wherein those willing to embrace their inner child best relate to material so grounded in Saturday matinee serials, and so, who better to star in a serial emblem than Indiana Jones, an adolescent sword who embraces his inner child, and ours, with every new adventure. The presence of his father weakens the manly swashbuckler aspect of this Indiana Jones story. Still, it humanizes the hero, in turn transforming the character into a child and, in another way, linking him to the raider from the film's opening, who gives Indy his signature fedora. Indy, then, combines his father's scholarly appetites and those reinforced by his second father, played by bit actor Richard Young, a character with whom Indy identifies and unconsciously mirrors in the rebellion against his father. Furthermore, perhaps this is why Indy has changed his name from Henry Jr. to Indiana, after the dog. Spielberg spearheaded the subplot, having explored father-son relationships reflective of his own broken rapport from childhood throughout his career. After his parents divorced, Spielberg moved with his father, Arnold, from Arizona to California and found his upbringing lonely and rough. His father's presence was remote, leaving him ostensibly abandoned and focused on his obsession with cinema. Pursuing his dreams with unparalleled determination, motivated in part by his rumored Asperger's syndrome, a mild form of autism, Spielberg made it without the support of his father, earning himself a 7-year contract with Universal Studios by the time he was 22. Time and again, viewers see his films shot from the child's point of view, both technically, with low angles, and thematically. It is impossible to watch the prologue in The Last Crusade where Jones Sr. refuses to turn and look at his frantic son, who arrives with urgent news about the Cross of Coronado, until the boy counts to 20, and in Greek no less, and not imagine Spielberg projecting his own experiences with a despondent father into the film. Circumstances comparable to the lacking connection between Spielberg and his father arise in nearly all his films to a tragic degree. The father in Close Encounters of the Third Kind leaves his family behind in favor of his own obsessions. The family in E.T., the extraterrestrial, is broken by the conspicuous lack of a father figure. Empire of the Sun features a young Christian Bale left by his family to fend for himself when Japan invades China in 1937. Hook features a grown-up Peter Pan. Oblivious to his children until he rediscovers his childhood spirit, the children lost in Jurassic Park look to a reluctant and uninterested Alan Grant, Sam Neill, for fatherly protection. AI. Artificial intelligence reflects on a robot boy desperate for parental love, yet unable to genuinely find or express such emotions. Catch Me If You Can depicts Frank Abagnale Jr.'s dad as an irresponsible swindler who advocates his son's con artist ways, while Jr. searches for a sturdy father figure even in the FBI agent chasing him. Minority Report takes the father's perspective, as Tom Cruise's character has lost his son and lives with the regret. Several other cases in Spielberg's filmography show the director's personal feelings influencing the story to meet his reflective emotional concerns. The above are simply the clearest cut instances. Rarely does Spielberg allow for a ceasefire between father and son, leaving his narratives curiously cynical toward the prospect of reunion and resolution. even amid his signature sentimentality. And yet, The Last Crusade perfectly accomplishes this task, seemingly without effort, by symbolizing a sought-after truth through the historical and mythical journey to find proof of the Holy Father, Jesus Christ, via the Holy Grail. Through Jesus' cup from the Last Supper, reconciliation is achieved among Christ and his apostles, Christ and his own humanity, Christ and God, and, finally, Christ and the Crusader searching for this fabled relic. The cup subsumes those designations within the film and strengthens them, providing magnitude to and a profound allegory for the one adventure shared by Indiana Jones and his father. That Indy sees the Grail as a device to save his father in the end, rather than as an important artifact, and allows it to drop back out of human reach, illustrates the film's theme of family over objectivity. The MacGuffin becomes more than an excuse for action as the Ark of the Covenant and the Sankara stones were in the previous Indiana Jones films. Instead, it denotes an all-encompassing device that signifies our hero's emotional journey as well as his literal one. Of course, The Last Crusade's emotional undercurrents should not imply this picture is devoid of action and suspense. On the contrary, like its predecessors, the film's non-stop momentum moves from one set piece to the next breathlessly, containing intrigue and thrills, and even a momentary run-in with Hitler himself. Once again, Indy faces creepy crawl eyes, this time in the form of rats in Venetian catacombs, it was snakes in Raiders of the Lost Ark, mounds of insects in Temple of Doom, flesh-eating ants in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The chases use every conceivable form of conveyance: boats, horses, cars, motorcycles, planes, tanks, and even a zeppelin. The story moves from Venice to Berlin to Hawaii. It ends in a fantastical sequence where Indiana Jones must pass a series of deathly traps before he meets the original Crusader and chooses, wisely, the Grail from 100 alternatives. It's all arranged with Spielberg's uncanny ability to make every moment appear classical, while Ford and Connery bring their characters' endearing relationship unexpected depth and humor. When the conclusion of this final mission arrives, Indy's newly earned appreciation for his father's wisdom and bravery would seem to close out the film's story arc, and perhaps so for the franchise as well. After all, the series does come full circle by incorporating characters from the first film, namely Marcus Brody, Denholm Elliott, and Salah, John Rhys Davis, as well as making Nazis the villains once more. It would be the perfect ending, wouldn't it? Indy riding into the sunset with his father, both now immortal after having sipped from the Grail. Then again, there's no existential theme running through Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom to suggest these three stories are connected in any significant way. Rather, they remain individual chapters, separate and distinct from one another. Indy's look of admiration when Jones Sr. crashes an airplane with a flock of birds, his realization that his father's quest for the Grail, which Indy believed hopeless, was indeed his own, his desperate actions to save his father's life, these events bring closure, if not peace, to the character. Though heavily publicized as the final Indiana Jones film, thanks to comments from both Lucas and Spielberg around the picture's 1989 release, The Last Crusade is not necessarily The Last Crusade. Ford took a cue from his co-star's history as James Bond, admitting he would never say never to another sequel. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull opened in theaters 19 years later. If Raiders of the Lost Ark remains the series' flawlessly balanced cinematic spectacle and Temple of Doom provides an ultra-simplification of suspense entertainment, this third entry in Spielberg's enduring series places a vital humanity into the series. If any characterizations are lacking in the previous films, if being the key term here, they become fleshed out in this entry, making repeat viewings of the trilogy all the more effective for the breakthroughs made therein. By association, Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade betters what came before it and brings new layers to a singular character in the way only an exceptional sequel can. Spielberg's most involved, personal entry into the franchise, The Last Crusade, suggests there are still Indiana Jones adventures to be had outside of chasing after another in a long line of MacGuffins. Spielberg adds self-understanding to the character's existing pantheon of great adventures by unearthing mysteries within our hero, seemingly entombed and just waiting to be excavated. Revisiting the Indiana Jones trilogy has been like hopping into a time machine and traveling back to my youth. Yes, I know there was an awful fourth movie, but what ardent indie lover actually embraces that train wreck? But the three original films are so deeply connected to my childhood. They led to me trying my hand at cracking a whip, a toy one, but a whip nonetheless, and desperately wanted a brown fedora. For a brief time they even had me wanting to be an archaeologist because everybody knows those movies were accurate depictions of archaeology, right? The third film, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, is a near-perfect picture of blockbuster movie making done right. It's wildly entertaining from start to finish, plump full of big action and infused with a steady stream of humor. All three Indiana Jones films have their witty and playful moments, but this one has the most laughs by far. The gags are so well written and delivered through Harrison Ford and Sean Connery's seamless chemistry and the impeccable comic timing of supporting players Denholm, Elliott and John Rhys Davis. I had forgotten how funny this movie is. Written by screenwriter Jeffrey Boehm from a story by George Lucas and Menno Mage, The Last Crusade opens by introducing us to a young Indiana Jones, played by the late River Phoenix. Set in 1912, the fun high-energy prologue plays like a legend's origin story of sorts. It reveals how Indy developed his fear of snakes, how he got his signature brown fedora, the whip, even Harrison Ford's real-life scar on his chin. And at a young age he already has that very Indy-like conviction that every archaeological treasure belongs in a museum. Jump ahead to 1938 and we meet Ford's Indy, fighting off pirates near the Portuguese coast and still teaching archaeology to starry-eyed college girls. He's reunited with his university colleague Marcus, Elliott, hysterical throughout, who connects him with a wealthy collector named Walter Donovan, Julian Glover. Donovan has unearthed part of a sandstone tablet believed to reveal the resting place of the Holy Grail, Christ's cup from the Last Supper. Arthurian legend states that whoever drinks from the Grail is granted eternal life. Indy agrees to help Donovan find the other half of the tablet only after hearing that his father, Henry Jones, Sr., Sean Connery, was part of a team that recently went missing while searching for the Grail. His adventure starts in Venice where he meets up with Elsa Schneider, Alison Doody, an associate of his father's, then it's off to Austria, Berlin, and Halle. Soon Nazis are hot on their heels, we meet a secret society of Holy Grail protectors, and fan favorite Salah, Rhys Davis, pops up to help his friends. Toss in some great action including a boat chase, a terrific motorcycle sequence, a daring escape on a German biplane, and a thrilling fight in and around a moving German tank. It's such a blast. Following some mixed reviews for the second film The Temple of Doom, a really good movie but the weaker of the three, Spielberg lightened the tone of this third indie outing and looked to recapture the spirit of the 1981 original Raiders of the Lost Ark. While the third installment has a feel all its own, it definitely rekindles the magic that made the first film such a delight. It's not as good as Raiders, but that's an incredibly high bar. While re-watching the Indiana Jones films I was struck by how remarkably well the three movies hold up. There are a couple of moments in The Last Crusade where you can see the blemishes in the early digital effects. But overall the movie looks great thanks to the fantastic cinematography, stunt work, and Spielberg's big-budget touch. And of course it's led by Harrison Ford, whose natural charisma and hero's charm turned Indy into a household name. And now he's putting on his fedora for one more Indiana Jones adventure. I pray it leans into what made the original three movies great and gives us a proper send-off to one of cinema's most fun and iconic characters. Praise be to the sequel gods for The Last Crusade, which did right by the franchise by stabilizing things from the shaky ground of Temple of Doom. After I had some time to digest that later film, I still think it's the odd man out in the franchise, so far. It's a B-movie from front to back, and while that's not a bad thing on its own, it just doesn't fit in with the rest of the Indiana movies. For Last Crusade, Steven Spielberg wisely returned things to their Lost Ark roots, Nazis, biblical artifacts, and a new PG-13 rating. After what I had seen under the PG banner in the last two films, I was practically expecting a 2-hour orgy of sex and death. Instead, I got a really funny and engaging movie. What'd you think? Hit the jump for why this was definitely the best of the franchise. The time jumps have never made a lot of sense to me. Why did we jump back in time in the second installment just to yo-yo forward in the third, especially when there's no relationship continuity to keep track of? Short Round never turned up again, neither did Marion, which surprised me. In fact, the Ravenwood seemed to be forgotten entirely. Whatever happened to Abner Ravenwood, supposedly Indy's mentor, who disappeared while searching for the Ark? We never hear of him again. Instead, Sean Connery appears as Indy's father, who was lost searching for the Grail, essentially taking Abner's spot. Connery could have played Abner easily, but it wouldn't have been allowed the nuances of the father-son relationship. Plus there would have been the Marion question. So, ultimately, it was a great move though to include Henry Jones, not only because we got an Indiana Jones Origins vignette starring River Phoenix, R.I.P. Sweet Prince, to help introduce his, at this point unseen, presence, but because of the way Connery and Harrison Ford played off of each other throughout the rest of the film. It was fantastic. It even made me forget, briefly, that they spoke not once but twice about having slept with the same woman. Yikes. The woman in question, Elsa, Alison Doody, aka Fraulein Hotness, made me give up any last hopes I had of the franchise producing anything close to a strong female character, but she did have really wonderful hair and dressing gowns, and some really Vogue desert goggles. There are so many issues with logic that have to be completely ignored, like, the Sworn Brotherhood did a really poor job of protecting the Grail, didn't they? But you know what, damn it, this movie was just fun. Marcus was back, Salah was back, the Nazis were back, even Hitler, and all provided some genuinely hilarious moments. The writing on Last Crusade was miles above the other films, and the cast came together in a way they really hadn't done before. I am mostly giving props to Connery for this. Above all, we find out that Indiana named himself after a dog. Fantastically weird way to end things. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is a conventional sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark in all of the ways that Temple of Doom is not. Last Crusade, like Raiders, features Indy and Nazis racing to track down an ancient Christian relic for almighty power. Last Crusade is reverential to the iconography and mythology and precedent of Raiders in ways that Temple of Doom ignored. And, like a typical sequel, Last Crusade suffers some from just a bit of diminishing returns. The main twist this time around is, of course, the inspired casting of Sean Connery as Harrison Ford's father. It might not make total sense on a genetics or accent level, but in terms of chemistry and cinematic X factor, it's absolutely perfect. I was struck watching this time that Connery really doesn't have all that much to do in the film except stand around and quip, but his presence is always felt and a huge boon. He adds both levity and gravity in appropriate doses, and his repartee with Ford is excellent. Better to have two charisma lightning bolts on screen than one. As with the first two Indiana Jones movies, pretty much everything in Last Crusade is excellently crafted and polished by Steven Spielberg. In fact, I dare say the movie might be too polished. There's a sense that every iota of this film has been calculated where the previous two indie flicks had an air of inventiveness and spontaneity. In particular, the middle act shows the seams of the Indiana Jones formula to me. We get one wheel-spinning adventure set piece after another, all of them pretty fun in isolation, but, for the first time, also burdened by the sense that we are just treading water until that perfect final act. Not helping the sense of overfamiliarity is the fact that, other than Connery, this has the most forgettable batch of side characters in the series. With Elsa, we get a quasi-love interest who is so obviously a bit of misdirection that I think it would have been more surprising if she actually ended up virtuous. There are a few other cameos from Raiders and disposable one-offs, no one as much goofy fun as Short Round, at least. I do love the River Phoenix casting of young Indy, though, the entire flashback prologue is a terrific pulpy bit of fun that rapid-fire introduces Indy's most familiar totems. Despite those reservations, this is still an absolutely delightful film. To the extent that it has its own identity, it's that it leans into a more comedic tone than either of the first two. Last Crusade is pure, frictionless entertainment, gluing your eyes to the screen. Something about that Indiana Jones recipe of historical and religious intrigue, blended with raw star power and energy, on a framework tightly constructed action scenes, remains cinema angel food cake. The climax, in particular, is unmissable. As Indy gets closer and closer to the Holy Grail, and the obstacles become more creative, the sense of danger rises and rises and rises. I am particularly smitten with the way the Grail trials are illusions that are each a tribute to the craft and power of filmmaking itself. It's a perfect grace note for the trilogy, a love letter to movies. Indeed, Last Crusade also feels like a proper farewell. It caps an emotional arc for Indy, sending him literally off into the sunset. I'm not a hater of Crystal Skull and will probably see the fifth, but I am reminded that the first three Indiana Jones movies work together as a pretty much perfect trilogy, one of the best in all of popcorn cinema. Yesterday was the 19th of December 2020, which also means the 19th day of Advent, with only 5 days left until Christmas Eve. Will I manage to watch a new film up until then, or will I not? So the film that I have just watched was the third film of the series, and that film was called Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, with my mum's favorite actor, who is sadly not with us no more because he died from pneumonia-triggered respiratory failure, atrial fibrillation and old age. He has played the character 007 or James Bond 5 times. That actor's name is Sean Connery. Here are some of his other movies he has been in, like Dragonheart he played the character Draco, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves he played King Richard, and he played as King Arthur in the film First Knight. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was all about when Indiana Jones, an archaeologist, learns that his father, Dr. Henry Jones, has disappeared while looking for the Holy Grail. He has to embark on a journey to get to him before the Nazis do, and find the Holy Grail before they do with his dad's dairy, and use the Holy Grail for bad things. My favorite character would Henry Jones, Indy's dad, because he kept upsetting his son Indiana by calling him Junior and not his name he prefers, and that is the name that the dog was given, which is Indiana, but Indy's full name is Henry Jones Jr., which he does not like very much, but he will respond to the name Junior if he has to. This film has been given a 5-star review because it kept making me laugh at what Indy's dad kept doing and not listening to his son. That is why he kept getting into trouble, and that meant Indy had to keep saving him from that danger he was in. That is the end of my film review, which was called Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. My next film, which is today, that I will be watching is the last film that was made, which is called Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, when he finds out that he has a son of his own because the mother is Marion Ravenwood, who he fell in love with from the first movie and got her pregnant without knowing he did this to her, and then left her with looking after the child on her own. Thank you for reading my film review on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I am sorry it's late, but it was on for 2 hours and 3 minutes, and that is on Sky Cinema, which has no adverts between the film. So thank you again, and I am truly sorry. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is the third film in the Indiana Jones series. Released in 1989, it was directed by Steven Spielberg. Although it was the third motion picture released, the movie is Chapter 25 in the complete adventures of Indiana Jones. Set 2 years after the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark, the story follows archaeologist Indiana Jones as he discovers his estranged father has gone missing while seeking out clues leading to the Holy Grail. Guided in his search by his father's diary, Jones learns that the Nazis are also interested in the biblical cup and must overcome them to be reunited with his parent. The movie was re-released on VHS in 1999, and twice on DVD in 2003 and 2008 respectively. The 2003 DVD was part of the Adventures of Indiana Jones box set containing the first 3 Indiana Jones films, while the 2008 release was promoted as a special edition of the film, as part of Indiana Jones, the Adventure Collection, the original trilogy, then individually and as part of the 4-film Indiana Jones, the Complete Adventure Collection. 1. The film received a high-definition home video release in 2012 as part of Indiana Jones, The Complete Adventures. There is a certain style of illustration that appeared in the boys' adventure magazines of the 1940s, in those innocent publications that have been replaced by magazines on punk lifestyles and movie monsters. The illustrations were always about the same. They showed a small group of swarthy men hovering over a treasure trove with greedy grins on their bearded faces, while in the foreground, 2 teenage boys peered out from behind a rock in wonder and astonishment. The point of view was always over the boys' shoulders. The reader was invited to share this forbidden glimpse of the secret world of men. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade begins with just such a scene. Director Steven Spielberg must have been paging through his old issues of Boy's Life and Thrilling Wonder Tales, down in the basement. As I watched it, I felt a real delight, because recent Hollywood escapist movies have become too jaded and cynical, and they have lost the feeling that you can stumble over astounding adventures just by going on a hike with your scout troop. Spielberg lights the scene in the strong, basic colors of old pulp magazines. When the swarthy men bend over their discovery, it seems to glow with a light of its own, which bathes their faces in a golden glow. This is the kind of moment that can actually justify a line like "It's mine. All mine." Although Spielberg does not go so far. One of the 2 kids behind the boulder is, of course, the young Indiana Jones. But he is discovered by explorers plundering an ancient treasure, and escapes just in the nick of time. The sequence ends as an adult claps a battered fedora down on Indiana's head, and then we flash forward to the era of World War II. The opening sequence of this 3rd Indiana Jones movie is the only one that seems truly original, or perhaps I should say, it recycles images from 1940s pulps and serials that Spielberg has not borrowed before. The rest of the movie will not come as a surprise to students of Indiana Jones, but then how could it? The Jones movies by now have defined a familiar world of death-defying stunts, virtuoso chases, dry humor and the quest for impossible goals in unthinkable places. When Raiders of the Lost Ark appeared, it defined a new energy level for adventure movies. It was a delirious breakthrough. But there was no way for Spielberg to top himself, and perhaps it is just as well that Last Crusade will indeed be Indy's last film. It would be too sad to see the series grow old and thin, like the James Bond movies. Even in this 3rd adventure, some of the key elements are recycled from Raiders. This time, Indy's quest is to find the Holy Grail, the cup Jesus Christ is said to have used at the Last Supper. To drink from the cup is to have eternal youth. The Holy Grail reminds us of the Ark of the Covenant in the first film, and in both cases the chase is joined by Nazi villains. The new element this time is how Spielberg fills in some of the past of the Jones character. We learn his real name, which I would not dream of revealing here, and we meet his father, Professor Henry Jones, who is played by Sean Connery on exactly the right note. Like the fathers of classic boys' stories, Dr. Jones is not a parent so much as a grown-up ally, an older pal who lacks 3 dimensions because children are unable to see their parents in that complexity. I kept being reminded of the father in the Hardy Boys books, who shook his head and smiled at the exploits of his lovable lads and only rarely expressed concern or cautioned them sternly. Since the Hardy Boys were constantly involved, at a tender age, with an endless series of counterfeiters, car thieves, kidnap rings, Nazi spies and jewel thieves, their father's detachment seemed either saintly or mad, and Connery has fun with some of the same elements. Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones again this time, and what he does seems so easy, so deadpan, that few other actors could maintain such a straight and credible presence in the midst of such chaos. After young Indy discovers his life's mission in the early scenes, the central story takes place years later, when Dr. Jones, the world's leading expert on the Holy Grail, is kidnapped by desperados who are convinced he knows the secret of where it is now hidden. He does. And Indy, working from his father's notebook, follows a trail from America to the watery catacombs beneath Venice, and then to the deserts of the Holy Land, where there is a sensational chase scene involving a gigantic Nazi armored tank. he is accompanied on his mission by Dr. Elsa Schneider, Alison Doody, an art historian he meets in Venice. But the character is a disappointment after the fire of Karen Allen in the first movie, and even the sultriness of Kate Capshaw in the second. Spielberg devises several elaborate set pieces, of which I especially like the rat-infested catacombs and sewers beneath Venice. I tried not to remember that Venice, by definition, has no catacombs. The art direction looks great in a scene involving a zeppelin, and an escape from the airship by airplane. And the great tank in the desert is fearsome and convincing. If there is just a shade of disappointment after seeing this movie, it has to be because we will never again have the shock of this material seeming new. Raiders of the Lost Ark, now more than ever, seems a turning point in the cinema of escapist entertainment, and there was really no way Spielberg could make it new all over again. What he has done is to take many of the same elements, and apply all of his craft and sense of fun to make them work yet once again. And they do. For me, Raiders of the Lost Ark is peak cinema. It is unequivocally one of the greatest movies ever made, one that embraced all the miraculous possibilities of film promised to children who watched everything from adventure serials to James Bond in their youth, yet synthesized with the creative brilliance and scale of Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. As with many of my generation, the kids who grew up with access to VHS and video stores, there was never a time that I can remember having not seen the Indiana Jones movies. They were just always around, much to my great fortune and glory. These films, even as a kid who could barely grasp the subtleties and nuances of the English language, I realized were things that actual humans like me made. The guy who played Han Solo is wearing that fedora and being a hero again. The guy who directed Star Wars has his name on these movies, and the guy who directed E.T. directed all the Indiana Jones films. These wonderful, brilliant men were all contributing to this body of work that brought so much joy to my childhood, and it was Indiana Jones that helped codify that notion in my barely formed brain. So, admittedly, my love for these films makes my analysis somewhat biased, but I am approaching them all with unabashed affection because I want to share those positive feelings with fellow lovers of film. The entire original trilogy has its advocates, each film being the favorite of many people whom I know personally or whose work I admire. Sometimes that favoritism is tied to which entry in the franchise they first saw in theaters or on video, and this could very well be generational. Those old enough to have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark in theaters might hold that as the supreme entry in the series, while if they were a few years younger, they might enjoy the Temple of Doom the most. I have no such first-time experience because, much like Star Wars, I cannot recall which film I saw first. I have always just known I've seen them. So why do I feel The Last Crusade is the best Indiana Jones film, or at least my favorite, even if I concede that Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the pinnacle achievements in film history? Upon release, Temple of Doom was decidedly less well received than Raiders. Sure, the second entry in the series is an exceptionally fun, delightfully bizarre, and well-executed adventure film with excellent performances from its leads and supporting cast. But it has some uneven elements, makes unexpectedly dark turns that took some audiences by surprise, and, most unfortunately, relies on lazy racial stereotypes for broad comedy that mostly falls flat. Do I still love it? Yes, but not as intensely as the first and third films. So what draws me to The Last Crusade? Sure, there is a sort of self-conscious return to the familiar formulae of Raiders, bringing back Denholm Elliott's Marcus Brody and John Rhys Davis' Salah, Judeo-Christian MacGuffins, and everyone's favorite villainous punching bags, Nazis. Back was also a lighter tone and a greater density of jokes, which might seem discordant when this film has actual Hitler and Nazis burning books in a rally reminiscent of an apocalyptic cult ceremony. Admittedly, that sort of "hey, let's return to what works" filmmaking has been the bane of franchises and filmmakers in the past, shifting the fragile balance between art, craft, and commerce that is inherent to making movies full-bore into the realm of commerce. Here, however, in the hands of a director as skilled as Spielberg, in a lead actor as charismatic as Harrison Ford, and a supporting cast as diverse and accomplished as all the actors assembled, everyone both in front of and behind the camera finds a groove in which they can operate at peak levels of craft and creativity, to dive headlong into the joys of movie making. The Last Crusade feels like coming home. The Last Crusade still clings to the serialized pacing and structure of the first two films. Much like the third entry in the Star Wars franchise, Return of the Jedi, released 6 years earlier, the first section is a totally self-contained mini-movie, one that sets the tone for the subsequent adventure but has little to no bearing on the actual plot. Also, both feature Harrison Ford in peril at the hands of powerful underworld figures. The Last Crusade's opening salvo of action and adventure, however, sets itself apart from the Jabba's palace rescue in Jedi by being a prequel, drafting the blueprints for the character he would become. Sure, it's a bit ham-fisted to establish the origin of so many iconic Indiana Jones accoutrements in one action sequence: his hat, his whip, his fear of snakes, and Harrison Ford's facial scar, just to help provide moments of payoff to guide the audience through the opening. The action is so clever, contains such wonderful unearthings of silent movie gags and adventure serial techniques, that Spielberg and Lucas could certainly have gotten away with explaining just one or two Jones traits. Plus, River Phoenix is phenomenal as the young Indy, providing the necessary balance of arrogance, confidence, foolishness, charisma, and resourcefulness to embody Harrison Ford's characterization, without having to impersonate Ford. However, the visceral impact of Phoenix rising, horrified, out of a pit of snakes increases the peril for what was, up until then, a more madcap chase through a train of circus props. Most eloquently, the transition from young Indy being crowned with his signature hat by one sympathetic fellow treasure hunter, into a soaking wet Harrison Ford being punched in the face on a storm-tossed boat is one of the most brilliant transitions I've ever seen in a movie. It's all focused on that damn cool-as-hell hat, a hat that is only cool because Indiana Jones is wearing it. So maybe it's okay to mythologize our hero just a bit. Speaking of mythologized figures, the opening also gives us the first glimpse and sound of Indy's father, Dr. Henry Jones, played by the legendary Sean Connery. As I've recently mentioned on the Film 89 podcast, I'm a sucker for good dad stories, and while Henry certainly is not that, this is the first seed planted in The Last Crusade for a dad's redemption story, one for a father and son to find meaning in each other's lives, to finally love each other, before the coming global conflagration of World War II might very well end their lives. That is a profound arc for these two stubborn men, and we see how far both Joneses need to go for that reconciliation when Indy comes running to his father with the artifact that was the object of the chase sequence in the first place, the Golden Cross of Coronado. Indy is there holding a priceless, sacred relic of gold and jewels that he risked his life for many times over, traveled miles across the American countryside for, battled gangsters and smugglers to acquire, and his father's response? Make him count in Greek because he needs to calm down. Buoyed by Phoenix's genuine, teenage eye-roll reaction, it's an indicative example of a parent profoundly disengaged from his son, and a son desperate but unable to impress his father. Henry Jones is too preoccupied with the contents of his scholarly work, the embodiment of a cliché-obsessed academic. We will later find out that he is composing the key to finding the Holy Grail itself, the Grail Diary. It may be important for the discovery of the most famous artifact in history, but it is also a doomsday book of Henry Jones' failures as a father, a catalogue of every bit of information in which he gathered, gaining strength and spiritual energy from dusty artifacts and men dead for thousands of years rather than from his own family. He would rather concentrate on his Grail Diary penmanship than even glance at his bloody, sweaty, exhausted child. Despite the profound, cold distance with which Henry Jones raised his child, that upbringing still gave us a profoundly adventurous, intelligent hero who is willing to put his mind and body on the line, to put aside personal gain, and even to save the world once or twice. He might do so with rolled eyes and an exhausted sigh, but he's still willing to fight Nazis and evil cultists to do what is right. At the same time, both men are perfect foils for each other, one a doggedly dusty academic who can barely summon the will to look up from his research to eat or drink, or care for his family, the other one so preoccupied with adventure and field work, he would rather climb out the window of his university office rather than grade papers. Indy is finally spurned onto his own Grail quest, becoming a 20th century Grail Knight, the kind his father would have chronicled during his own research. When he is recruited by Walter Donovan, a sort of angel investor for Holy Grail associated expeditions. Indy is hesitant until he learns Donovan had initially hired the elder Jones and is only coming to Indy now because Henry has disappeared. However out of place Indy feels in the setting of black ties and champagne, of hoarding ancient treasures in private collections rather sharing them with the public, he can't resist. The ghosts of Indy's past, his father, his father's work, the origins of Indiana's interest in archaeology, have come to a nexus in this one upper crust meeting with Donovan. He embarks on a journey to find both his father and his father's white whale. He would later regret this deviation from his instincts, but if he did, we wouldn't have this great movie. During his Grail quest, Indy meets Elsa Schneider, played with a balance of ice and exoticism by the great Alison Doody, his father's former partner in his Donovan-funded expedition. Dr. Schneider is one of the most fascinating characters in the Indiana Jones canon, one in love with her work, in the adventure of finding ancient artifacts, but also in the power that could be gained from them. She is willing to align herself with the Nazis in order to achieve her goals and to manipulate the men around her to get what she wants, never revealing her true motives to any of them. The only person she is loyal to is herself, unconcerned with ideology or the consequences of her actions. Although she would betray the Doctors Jones in favor of Donovan and the Nazis, she has no more loyalty to them than Indiana and Henry. In fact, she would plead for Indy to run away with her with the Grail at the end of the film. I guess a rugged and charming Harrison Ford is a more pleasant partner to spend a lifetime with than Nazis, at least after she had the Grail in hand and all her Nazi partners are dead. In their initial adventures, however, Elsa and Indy's own partnership is solidified in their underground exploration of the Knight's tomb while in Italy. Their mutual enthusiasm for finding the next step in their quest is palpable, even as they navigate around rats, subterranean conflagrations, and long-dead bodies. They both are breathless as they explore centuries-old catacombs and make rubbings of a knight's shield with the thrill of discovery only a true lover of history and the lives of those long dead can comprehend. In a sad and poignant character moment, when Indy is told of his father's equivalent enthusiasm, he can scarcely believe it because he never saw his father behave in such a way. In this one exchange, we get an entire history of the Jones men's lives. Not only did Henry never show Indy any sort of excitement for anything his son did, but if they had only been more open with each other, they could have had 1,000 moments like this, of the shared euphoria of discovery. Amid this triumph, there is an echo of a lifetime of missed opportunity, and a brilliant bit of storytelling after a thrilling boat chase and the revelation that a millennia-old secret society has been keeping tabs on the Grail and Jones. This movie is packed with plot, isn't it? Elsa and Indy travel to Castle Brunwald on the Austro-German border where Indy's father is being held. Although he does rescue his father, in a manner of speaking, Henry and Indy begin castigating and sniping at one another within minutes, especially after Elsa reveals her allegiance with the Nazis and the fact that she had affairs with both Joneses. No matter what heroic deeds of daring do Indy accomplished just getting to the castle, Henry can do nothing but belittle his son for now needing rescue himself and for bringing the Grail diary within literal arm's length of the Nazis. It's a wonderful emotional mirroring of the end of the young Indiana Jones sequence, with a father and son who should be embracing and celebrating their reunion, one accomplished only after intense mental and physical struggle, but all they can manage is frustration within an unwillingness to understand one another. The pair go on to escape the castle because, hey, it's an Indiana Jones movie. However, during the escape we are treated to some of the best odd couple chemistry in cinema history. The back and forth energy between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery is so fun and entertaining to witness. Entire stories are told in each bout of repartee. Even if the age difference between Connery and Ford was only 12 years, they embody their respective roles so completely as to make every exchange believable. Both actors are bona fide movie stars, among the most famous and charismatic of their respective generations. They know who they are, what their job is in this movie, and how to propel a scene forward. The only reason a film like this works, with its rolling wave of set pieces and sequences, is because Connery and Ford are able to go from death-defying motorcycle chases complete with explosions and physics-defying stunts, to intimate conversation in the time it takes to adjust a fedora. With a sudden shift in filmmaking language and emotional tone, we are privy to the Jones men confronting how Henry was unable to appreciate the love of his wife until he was forced to mourn her death, a long, slow process of family disintegration Indy spent his childhood witnessing. Sure, this is big-time adventure filmmaking, but because of the preternatural skill of Spielberg as a director, especially when it comes to troubled father-slash-son stories, and the strength of the two leads, this scene hits just as hard as a punch from Indiana Jones to a Nazi jaw. We care about our leads and believe in their relationship. We see the capacity for love each has for one another and want them to achieve reconciliation just as much as we want them to find the Grail. Only a Jones could convince Indiana to go to Berlin. Once the Jones men decide to find the lost Grail diary, they journey to Berlin to obtain it, which results in a particularly terrifying encounter with both Elsa Schneider and Adolf Hitler himself, both of whom happen to be attending a Nazi book burning. This is a reminder of the very real, very terrifying evil the Jones men are fighting against. The Indiana Jones films are exciting adventures, but there is real horror here, a real-world evil, and the fire and madness of this rally reminds us of it. With the Grail diary reacquired, our heroes are off on the trail of the Nazis and the sacred cup itself. The Jones men do take time to sit for a long overdue conversation, after boarding a Zeppelin and punching a Nazi of course, in which they settle into their roles of the son trying his best to impress his condescending father. The characters obviously have a great many things to discuss, years of successive dialogues that parse out the failings of their relationship and where to go from there. Henry, however, approaches the subject like an academic review of a scholarly work. "What do you want to talk about?" he says, as if their entire father-son dynamic can be fixed in the time between getting drinks and starting on appetizers. Even with all they have been through together, Henry still cannot empathize with his son, nor can he see the need to repair their relationship. They have yet to connect on a deep, spiritual level. Again, we are anchored to our leads with some subtle and very human performances by Connery and Ford, along with deft screenwriting by Jeffrey Boehm, Menno Mage, and George Lucas. As much flack as Lucas would get for his screenwriting on the Star Wars prequels, when collaborating with Boehm, Mage, and Spielberg, the dialogue is fresh, natural, and funny. We savor every exchange and are as entertained by conversation as we are glorious action because these characters are fully formed and fun to spend time with. Speaking of action, we only get brief moments of father-son not quite bonding before the good doctors are interrupted by more Nazis determined to murder them. This time the thrilling action sequence manifests as an elaborate aerial dogfight, in the tradition of the golden age of Hollywood. The Indiana Jones franchise, in part, pays tribute to. Here, as in every scene, really, special attention should be given to cinematographer Douglas Slocum, stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong, and the supremely talented visual and makeup effects teams, without which such sequences would not be possible. We are even treated to another wonderful character moment, in which Henry Jones, using nothing but his umbrella and some tuk-tuk noises, destroys an airplane by scaring a flock of birds into taking off into the plane's windshield. He struts past Indy, makes up a Charlemagne quote, and walks off as if he already saved the world. It's a moment that utilizes the perception of Henry, by both Indy and the audience, as an eccentric cloistered academic, in his tweed suit and umbrella, and shows us how he can turn that aspect of himself into a capable, in-the-field operative. It's a confidence builder for Henry and a moment of both bewilderment and respect for Indy, bonding the two men with the most wholesome of father-son activities, killing Nazis. In the final approach to the Grail's hiding place, we are treated to one of the most entertaining chase sequences I have ever had the pleasure to witness. It has horses chasing a tank, furious Nazi punching, and Marcus Brody and Henry Jones squirting pen ink into a soldier's face. It's both thrilling and humorous to watch, but again, the sequence is punctuated by a moment in which Henry thinks his son has plummeted off a cliff to his death. Although Indy can barely stand, he's wrapped up in an intimate embrace by his father, showing more bare emotion than we've seen in the entire film. For a moment, Henry thought all that would be left of his family would be another memory to mourn, like his wife, all before they reached a mutual understanding. Now they both have a second chance, even if Henry immediately reverts to telling his son what to do. There is little time for the Jones boys to enjoy their new lease on life as they find the Grail's final resting place swarming with Nazi soldiers and lackeys, trying to find their way through a maze of booby traps. When our heroes are captured, Henry is shot by Donovan in an attempt to force Indy to navigate the inner workings of the Grail castle and retrieve that most sacred of artifacts. Indy avoiding the deadly traps of an ancient fortress is a callback to the opening sequence of Raiders of the Lost Ark, as well as a means of communicating how, finally, Indy and his father are connected. The audience's memory of Raiders also lets us know how high the stakes truly are in this moment. This is no adventure for a golden idol in which some fast-running, whip-swinging, and a well-placed seaplane can guarantee a safe getaway. This is a battle for the life of Indy's father and against the forces of darkness, and the Jones' mutual ability to traverse these ancient obstacles is a testament to their bond and the peril they find themselves in. As Indy goes deeper and deeper into the castle depths, he encounters deadly trials that could lead to a fall to his death or decapitation. It is only through the understanding of the Grail diary and his father that Indy is able to navigate these tests of faith. Although Indy has seen the power of the supernatural on numerous occasions, he could never be described as a person of deep faith. His father, on the other hand, is driven on a quest for the Grail because of his faith, and he is able to share that with his son in this paramount moment. With his father near death, knowing his only hope is to reaching the healing power of the Grail, Indy is able to take that final leap and reach the innermost sanctum. Guarding that sanctum is the Grail Knight, and the encounter with that immortal guardian is one of the most fascinating scenes in the franchise. The Knight is a character right out of myth, a faithful guardian, grayed by the centuries, waiting for his successor to come and take up this sacred duty. He is as far away from the historical Crusader knights in morality and faith as Henry Jones is from Walter Donovan, but that is why he was chosen for this task. He was the only one who had the same faith that brought Indy to this place. The knight is even canonized in his final shot near the end of the film. As the stone edifice around him collapses, he waves farewell to the world, framed as a medieval portrait come to life. Belief in the power of the Grail is not enough, however. As Elsa Schneider and Walter Donovan enter the Grail's sacred resting place, they make their intentions clear: they want the cup. With the knight's immortal words of "choose wisely," Donovan, urged on by Elsa, chooses the most aesthetically beautiful golden chalice and drinks deep from it. We are then treated to a spectacular scene of rapid desiccation and death, courtesy of makeup and effects artists Nick Dudman and Stefan Dupuis, as Donovan reaps the rewards of his poor choice and Elsa's manipulation. Indy, however, is wise and pragmatic enough to spurn any temptations for greed or power and chooses the cup of a carpenter. He is able to take the Grail back to his father and, holding him in a position reminiscent of a religious icon, helps him drink from the cup. In spite of his skepticism, Indy takes on the role of the saint, giving healing succor to the sick and the dying. He may never be a religious man, but Indy drew strength from the faith of his father and their renewed love for one another and was able to heal him, physically and spiritually. Nazis lack the morality and perspicacity of the Jones boys, however, and as the magic of the Grail causes the fortress that had been its home for centuries to crumble, chaos ensues. Elsa has witnessed the healing abilities and miraculous power of the Grail and can only think of how she can use it for her own personal gain. She tries to escape the fortress with it gripped tightly between her hands, but the further away from the inner sanctum the Grail travels, the more violently it shakes the very earth that shelters it. Despite Indy's best efforts to save her, Elsa is swallowed up into rocks and fog beneath the fortress. Desperate to save the Grail itself, Indy risks plummeting to the same doom and reaches into the bottomless chasm for the cup. It is only with the urging of his father, who finally calls his son by his preferred name, Indiana, that Indy is able to let it go and let his father save him. It's an incredibly touching moment as both men are able to meet each other as equals and as father and son. Their relationship has been resurrected thanks to the quest they have completed with one another, and there is no more need for a physical artifact. Their love for one another is all the Holy Grail they will ever need. Cue the Joneses, Marcus Brody and Salah riding off, literally into the sunset. So maybe it's my weakness for good guys saving the day and for great father/son stories, or my Catholicism influencing my opinions on Indiana Jones the way it influences how I view movies like The Exorcist and Kronos, but I can't help but find Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade the most fun, fulfilling, and emotionally satisfying entry in the franchise. It has everything the other Indiana Jones movies have: a great score by the immortal John Williams, thrilling action sequences, Nazi punching, excellent supporting characters like John Rhys Davis Salah and Denholm Elliott's Marcus Brody, a fantastic female lead in Alison Doody, great villains in Julian Glover's Walter Donovan and Michael Byrne's Nazi Colonel Vogel. What sets Last Crusade apart is the undeniable chemistry between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery, between father and son, and the increased psychological and spiritual import the film takes on from that relationship. Regardless of how Indy and Henry are different in temperament and religious beliefs, their journey to find faith in each other is the true crux of this film. So much blood has been spilled over religious wars, over the artifacts fought for in the Indiana Jones films, that it is a perfect culmination to this trilogy that this artifact helps bring healing to two characters who have been so broken, and broken by the obsessive search for those very objects. We, the audience, have journeyed with them as they find that love in each other, so we can celebrate in that ultimate victory because we love them too. The defining fact about 1989's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is that it isn't Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. On its own, this fact is hardly distinctive. Many, if not indeed most, movies are not Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The key difference is that Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is the only movie I know that is specifically repudiating Temple of Doom, which was a big ol' money maker in 1984, as the first sequel to the 1981 mega-blockbuster Raiders of the Lost Ark was always bound to be. But it was also controversial for its extreme violence. Famously, it was the immediate cause for the creation of the PG-13 rating in the United States, and divisive among the series fans and its creators, I rather expect. Director Steven Spielberg has always made it very clear that he's the custodian of the Indiana Jones pictures, not their primary author, always making it clear that they are George Lucas's thing, and in that capacity I don't know that he's ever actually spoken out against the second movie in the series. He's too loyal for that kind of thing. But just from the evidence of the movie itself, I think you can tell that the director of Temple of Doom really didn't like what he was making, and I suspect he himself was as happy as anybody for Last Crusade to be specifically not that. And so it is, specifically, not that. Even more specifically, it's a retrenchment to Raiders of the Lost Ark, replicating the basic narrative structure, including approximately equivalent set pieces at approximately the same spot in the script, bringing back pre-World War II Nazis as the villains, and featuring as its central MacGuffin a major lost artifact from Judeo-Christian lore rather than the vague and under-researched we think this might be something sort of from Hinduism relics at the centerpiece of Temple of Doom. It mostly takes place in a desert country bordering the Mediterranean. This is all, to be fair, subordinate to an absolute whale of a high concept, brand new to Last Crusade. Indiana Jones needs to rescue his dad, who is James Bond. But the point is extremely clear: if you liked the first movie and didn't like the second, they made the third one to apologize to you. I think there are two basic responses one can have to all of this: it's just like Raiders, and I liked Raiders, so I like this, versus it's just like Raiders, and I liked Raiders, so I'd frankly rather just rewatch Raiders, and be a little grumpy that they didn't try something new again. I am now and have been since a very young age the second type of person, and I'll go ever farther in saying that I'm actually also a pretty big fan of Temple of Doom, and then I'll go all the way into pure chaotic madness by saying that I actually prefer Temple of Doom to Last Crusade, so you're welcome to ignore all the things I have to say about anything ever again. But setting aside all of that, there's absolutely no disputing that Last Crusade is still an awfully good and deliciously watchable popcorn movie, made by probably the single most reliable director of popcorn movies in the history of American cinema, when he was still pretty close to the peak of his powers. Not, I think, at the peak. Spielberg in 1981 was broadly in the midst of maybe the single greatest runs of popular entertainments ever produced by a single director, Jaws in 1975, Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977, E.T. The Extraterrestrial in 1982, but he was also specifically coming off of his first outright fiasco, 1979's 1941. So he was hungry to prove himself, and had all the necessary talent to prove it. Spielberg in 1984 was still glowing from the incredible success of that 1975 to 1982 run, and also starting to wonder what kind of artist he was, and if nothing else, Temple of Doom was undoubtedly a challenge to make. Spielberg in 1989, in contrast to the above two Spielbergs, had very obviously started to lose interest in being Hollywood's premier crafter of immaculate pop art. In the 5 years between Indiana Jones pictures, he directed The Color Purple and Empire of the Sun, and he was gearing up to make his other 1989 film, the first year with two Spielberg releases, in fact, always. Indeed, I'd say that none of his pure popcorn movies after 1982 have the extravagant perfection in their craftsmanship as those four masterpieces around the turn of the decade, and every time he's returned to this mode in the intervening 3 decades and change, it's with a certain stiffness and uncertainty, a distinct level of having to relearn how to make those impeccable choices. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, as the first film of this new era of Spielberg, is the one where he had the least amount to relearn, and you can see the stiffness the least. So off-peak Spielberg, but only slightly off-peak, and few peaks were ever higher. What this means in the act of watching the movie is that the concluding 50 minutes, it runs 121 in total, before the credits, are some of the best big-ass popcorn movie making of the 1980s, and that is a decade that had an extraordinarily high success rate for big-ass popcorn movies. There were fewer of them, so they each had to count for more. In fact, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was part of the fabled summer of 1989, which is when that started to shift, with its overwhelming slate of big sequels and other major tentpoles. Many films died that summer, but not Last Crusade. It was the year's number 2 film, behind only the undeniable force that was the first Batman. The main set piece in the film's second half is, by itself, a strong candidate for the honor, being the decade's best action-adventure sequence outside of Raiders of the Lost Ark itself, the lengthy tank chase, which is objectively just a retread, pardon the expression, of the truck chase from the first movie, but adds enough wrinkles and new conceits to feel like a wholly new thing. It's especially good at switching between multiple lines of action, inside and outside of multiple tanks, with Spielberg's irreplaceable editor Michael Kahn finding a beautiful rhythm as he switches from one space to another, letting the sense of speed control his handling of the scene, but also finding perfect little beats to use as transitions, so that it feels like the action is escalating between cuts, not just within shots. And in the middle of a very strong score overall, the equally irreplaceable John Williams is probably up to his most important structural work here, controlling the pace and rising tension of the scene through his thumping, martial music. That's probably the film's highlight, both in terms of action and pure craftsmanship, but there's very little in the long last chunk of the film that I don't think works. It has a nice variety. Besides the grinding tension of the tank scene, there's a much fluffier, pseudo-comic action set piece involving planes, and a bouncy Williams theme that is my favorite of this film's score, there's a fantastic temple traps thriller sequence that's pretty distinctly the most fun thing here, in part because the filmmakers openly treat their sacred temple to the gravest artifact in all of Christendom as a carnival haunted house, and not even a terribly high-class one, to judge from the unmotivated eerie light pointing up at those curtain-like waterfalls of spiderwebs. At the same time, the director is treating it with precision and care, making the sense of mystery and danger surrounding all of this nonsense feel unexpectedly legitimate. I can come up with one substantive complaint about any of this. I think the temple is overlit, the one time in 3 Indiana Jones movies that cinematographer Douglas Slocum made a choice that I don't think is self-evidently the right one. And it's not even just a nitpick, given the importance of these sequences in the overall plot, but it's hardly film-breaking. Also, in general, 80s action films had a problem with overlighting ostensibly gloomy cavernous spaces, so it's by no means a sin unique to this one film. So, the last 50 minutes, great stuff, fully on par with the best of the series. The problem is, and this is where I'm going make some people very sad with me, I think the opening 71 minutes are a lot less consistent. I think, in fact, that parts of those 71 minutes are actually bad, which is neither fun to say about an Indiana Jones film nor a Spielberg film of this vintage. He was on the verge of a decade where actually bad things would start becoming more common, sorry to say. The film's big selling point, from 1989 to the present day, is that Harrison Ford's earnest but sly Indiana Jones, swashbuckling archaeologist, would now have to go head-to-head with his haughty bookworm dad, Henry Jones, Sr., played by no less a carved-in-granite icon than Sean Connery. There's the famous story that Spielberg was telling George Lucas, one day in the 70s, that he wanted to direct a James Bond picture, to which Lucas responded that he had an idea for something better than Bond. And Indy was the result. There has, as such, always been an unmistakable charm that the figurative father of Indiana Jones would be called in to play the literal father of Indiana Jones. This was self-evidently the material that got Spielberg the most excited. Finally, an Indiana Jones picture about the fraught relationship between a demanding, unavailable father and an overachieving son. And it's pretty much the first thing anybody talks about when they bring this movie up, and I agree, Connery and Ford are complete movie bliss as a bickering odd couple, with Connery's peremptory smugness fitting the character like a glove, and his own irritability providing a real challenge to Ford's notorious prickliness. I am tempted to say that, throughout the running time of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, there's not a single scene predicated on any exchange of dialogue between the two actors that doesn't work, and generally, they work very well. The issue is that Sean Connery shows up in the 47th minute of the movie. And I won't say that nothing in those first 46 minutes works. I will, however, say that a shockingly small amount of it does. A big part of the problem is that Last Crusade is much more invested in light comedy than any other film in the series, with, among other things, a largely comic, flippant series of scenes in Venice, Ford looking agog at various pratfalls, and the adjustment of supporting character Marcus Brody, Denholm Elliott, from reserved, thoughtful historian to flailing idiot buffoon, a change that does not merely happen between Raiders and Last Crusade, it actually happens in Last Crusade itself. And the thing about all of this comedy is that Spielberg is absolutely garbage at staging comedy. 1941 was a disaster on that front, but even in his good films, he tends to have more cuteness or warm mirth than actually good jokes. It is his one unambiguous shortcoming as a director. And this is trying very hard, for much of its running time, to be funny. It's almost never successful. Outside of the blithe Ford/Connery banter, which is probably more towards that mirth I was just talking about, though some bits are obvious laugh lines, I think only 2 jokes actually land. The ironic juxtaposition of Indiana's serious monologue about Marcus with our first glimpse of Marcus as a dopey clown, and the bit where Indiana, disguised as an airship officer, explains to a terrified crowd that the Nazi he just threw out a window had no ticket. Otherwise, I frankly find the film's attempts to be light-hearted somewhat facile and tedious. And there are other problems in that first longer part. The film opens a prologue set in 1912, where young Indiana Jones, River Phoenix, reveals himself to us as a passionate young hothead even then, while we see the detachment between father and son for the first time. It is, on the one hand, very much from the mind of the same George Lucas who was soon to start giving us Star Wars prequels. It's an old complaint of mine, but having Indy receive, in this order, a lifelong fear of snakes, a bullwhip, a distinctive scar on the chin, and a beat-up brown fedora all in one afternoon, all in about a 7-minute span, for the first 3, is the most pandering bullshit. Exactly the same shrink the universe down until it's the size of a pebble instinct that gave us young Darth Vader inventing C-3PO in The Phantom Menace, or Yoda being good buddies with Chewbacca in Revenge of the Sith. And on the other hand, all respect to the honored dead, I don't think Phoenix is very good. The thing about Ford's Indy is that he's super charismatic and charming, while also being a bumbling nerdy fuck-up who mostly only succeeds in these movies by random chance and accident. Phoenix's Indy is none of these things. I suppose some people may find him charismatic, but I think there's too much bottled up frustration at an unfair world living inside his performance to match what Ford is up to here, or has been up to in the preceding 2 movies. It's also just not paced or structured all that well, setting aside everything else. Wasting 47 minutes until we get to the actual movie just feels too baggy. The script for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is formally credited to Jeffrey Boehm, whose career doesn't have really much else of real note, but it was extensively punched up by Tom Stoppard, whose career has many things of real note. Stoppard's job was mostly to punch up the relationship between the Doctors Jones, and this is probably why the humor there works better than elsewhere in the film. He also made a couple of changes to the structure, all of them for the best, but only a couple in the first hour. So if it feels like there are 2 scripts glued together here, there kind of are. And that first script is just a bit odd and ramshackle, dawdling on scenes that aren't working, given how graceful and atmospheric the exposition scenes about the Ark of the Covenant were in Raiders. It's quite visible and annoying how lumpy the exposition is here around the Holy Grail, which I'd say is a much simpler thing to explain to American audiences. During the Venice sequence especially, it seems like the film is just hopping across plot points without explaining them at all. There's a bit solving a puzzle inside an old library that used to be an older church, and while we get an incredibly good crane shot out of the deal, maybe the best single shot in the whole movie, definitely the best shot in the first 46 minutes, I have never, in all the times that I've watched this film, understood why the numbers actually matter. I am potentially being hard on the first hour. There's a very good storm sequence and a perfectly fine ship chase sequence, though I think it's the weakest vehicular chase scene in any of the 80s Indiana Jones movies, and, crucially, you can tell that Harrison Ford actually likes playing Indy, just as clearly as you could always tell that he did not like playing Han Solo. And while his performance takes a pretty big step up in quality once he gets Connery to play against, he's still doing pretty good with very little support prior to that, even managing to flirt hard enough with the film's bland female lead, Alison Doody, whose main acting choice is a cartoon German accent, to sell the alleged chemistry between them, something he wasn't as good at in Temple of Doom, I'll admit. And even though I think Spielberg is letting himself coast sometimes, this has, to me, by far the fewest wow I loved that compositions and moments of ingenious visual storytelling of any of the 4 Spielberg indie films, and yes, I said 4, he was still Steven Spielberg in the 80s, and there is a level of populist magnificence that he just had, even when he wasn't trying to prove he had it. At its laziest and least effective, this is still an exceptionally good example of frothy, bubbly popcorn movie magic, and with all my reservations, this still has to be one of the 3 or 4 best summer blockbusters of the second half of the 1980s. This film, directed by Steven Spielberg, screenplay by Jeffrey Boehm, story by George Lucas, based on characters, produced by Robert Watts, starring Harrison Ford, cinematography Douglas Slocum, edited by Michael Kahn, Music by John Williams. Production company Lucasfilm Ltd. Distributed by Paramount Pictures. Release date May 24, 1989. Running time 127 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $48 million. Box office $474.2 million.